Chapter 26, Dark Room 12, Death Traps. Chapter text Death Traps. When I came to, I couldn't move. Thick ropes bound me to some kind of stone, the irregular surfaces pressing into my back, making me believe it was a statue. It was cold and damp, with minimal light leaking through my eyelids, a rough, chill stone floor beneath me where I sat on the ground. It felt like my legs were also tied together, but not anchored to anything. A smell of wood fire and potion brewing covered the general mildewed air. "I know you're awake, Dresden," Valdelockhart's voice chided. "I revivified you." I opened my eyes, since the game was up, and saw him a few paces away, still in the same blue outfit, hat still missing. He was lit primarily by the firelight coming from beneath an immense cauldron. Macnair was tending the oversized potion vessel, and the fact that he hadn't bothered with his Death Eater regalia made me believe they didn't intend for me to survive to provide any further evidence. He'd fashioned a new axe, leaned haphazardly against nearby trunks, likely of potion supplies, a high-backed chair of all things, facing away from me behind it. Due to the stillness of the air, lack of stars, and flickers of dim light on other structures, I got the sense that I was in some kind of vast underground room. As my eyes further adjusted, I could pick out a low-lying greenish light being emitted by rows of snake statues. No, snake-carved columns, likely similar to the one I was bound to. Focusing beyond the nearby firelight, I could make out a large, poorly carved relief of a wizard with an almost oversized face across the central wall to my left, obviously the focal point of the room. Hell's bells, there is a chamber of secrets, I realized. "Do you like it?" Valdelockhart asked, looking around with pride. "I made it myself. It took most of the summer before my 7th year, but I needed room for my creation to grow, and it seemed a fitting tribute to old Salazar. It was just a small cave system. When I found it, that sculpture all there was for decoration. You hatched your own Slytherin's monster, I guessed. It wasn't big enough to actually kill anyone when you were in school, so you had to use the acromantula venom." He nodded. Old Dumbledore never could figure it out, still looking for a new spell. That was most of the point, really. Build the myth of Salazar, so my heirship to Slytherin would be more meaningful and divert suspicion at the same time. And big, dumb Hagrid to take the fall at the end. "But Myrtle Warren forced you to speed up your timetable," I suggested. There was a grimace there. I didn't realize when that girl's useful infatuation made her dangerously persistent. If she'd gone to Dumbledore with what she knew, it could have all fallen apart. I spent so much time researching ways to banish ghosts when it turned out she hadn't passed on, and then the stupid girl gave up no useful information for 50 years. "I assume she finally talked to you. She just needed someone to be nice to her," I tried to shrug, stopped by the ropes. "So why let this place sit for half a century and try to take it back over now? Here is where ISS shall continue the tale," a voice that was much more distinctively Voldemort's hissed from the shadowed chair. "It's SSSO/SS Strange, being in two places at Ankhs. After you interfered with my acquisition of the SS stone a year ago, my SS servants were at least ready with my backup plan. But then I was on the clock to finish this ritual. The stone was a fake, by the way," I told him. "All I did was keep you from killing a bunch of kids for nothing." That got a hissed snort of annoyance. "Where is old Nart, by the way?" Macnair started, apparently not having realized I knew who his partner was. Voldemort explained, running interference. SS Summon underestimated the difficulty of capturing the Weasley twins. Valdelockhart looked both abashed and annoyed at being rebuked by the prime version of himself. "I meant to keep you until SS Sunday and do the ritual at Easter, but this will be good enough. And if I just hid behind wards all weekend?" I asked. "SSSO many hostages here to convince you to rush out like a foolish Gryffindor to SS save them. It was only a bit of a SS surprise you did SSSO unbidden. At least Quirrell hadn't done both the stutter and the snaky speech impediment. It was hard enough following him as it was, though I continued to be grateful for his tendency to monologue. I'd have hated to die without knowing what the hell was going on. So, what? You need the blood of an enemy, forcibly taken as part of a ritual to get a new body. You going to jump right back on the scene, or is Gilderoy Lockhart going to have a verifiable big hero moment, slay the basilisk, cover up the whoopsies, and then you've got two of you playing both sides? "I told you he was SS smart," Voldemort told his copy. I've had him in classes, and I have Lockhart's memories, the possessed professor agreed. He actually taught Lockhart how to teach defense classes. The man just kept making him forget about those little sessions to preserve his own image. That hurt, and suddenly made a lot of sense. Already a one-crafter as well. I saw a small, deformed hand hold my unicorn horn focus over the edge of the chair. I believe a brother core to my own, burned wand. He began to flick it, trying to cast spells. Incomplete work, however. I realized they must have taken my foci and glanced over to look for the others, not seeing them. Then my mother's amulet was also dangled off the side of the chair. Pity that Margaret McGregor's SS-San would be my enemy. That was pretty much on you, man, I told him. You kept trying to possess me. It was on Margaret, he snarled. Again and again, that girl failed to follow her orders, leaving her assignment, taking up with a muggle, bearing him the SS-San that was owed to another. SSG defied me again and again, and he suddenly stopped, as if struck by a thought. Then he began a coughing, hissing chuckle, as if he'd realized something hilarious. SS self-fulfilling. Your tale did not truly begin until you were touched by Lord Voldemort directly, reborn that day from the fires that burned your childhood. Well, if I wasn't going to kill you before, I would have to now. Yeah, ha 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 ha. I faked laughing along politely. Good times. I don't get it. SS simply that I took a prophecy too literally. No wonder the old meddler has been protecting you. He already figured it out. More luck to me, then, that he failed SSSO utterly. The potion in the cauldron finally began to change color and emit its own sparks, the surface taking on a diamond-like sheen. Well, it SS seems it is time. Any more quick questions before your end? I racked my brain and finally came up with Severus Snape. Was he the half-blood prince, and why did he really try to destroy you? He was a half-blood, and his mother's name was Prince, yes, and the tales are true. As with the Warren girl, I underestimated how infatuation might ruin my plans. It is all the more humorous that I needn't have worried about the Potters at all. More dark chuckling, and he ordered, Macnair, Lockhart, begin. Valde Lockhart walked over toward the ugly giant relief of Sal, while Macnair picked a small bundle up from the chair, and I realized that Voldemort had formed a tiny, deteriorating homunculus to inhabit. Had he looked like a rotting baby for months? If I survived this, I was going to have so many jokes to make. I paid careful attention to where my foci were left poking slightly over the edge of the arm of the chair. With a look almost of pity at me, the horrifying, diminutive form of Voldemort was dropped into the cauldron. Across the chamber, Valde Lockhart hissed something at the statue, the only true example of medieval art in the room, and its mouth opened into a huge black hole, from which the immense form of the basilisk began to slither. I averted my eyes, but suspected that it would lid its own with friendlies in the area. I heard a sharp crack of metal on stone, and the possessed professor walked back over holding a large shard of the carving. Macnair intoned, Bone of the Father, unknowingly given, you will renew your son. The professor placed the stone chip into the cauldron, turning it a vivid blue. Flesh of the servant, willingly given, you will revive your master. He followed, and Valde Lockhart moved over to the basilisk with his ritual knife, hissing quietly and soothingly. I chanced a look, and the snake's eyes were closed. It truly was gigantic. The professor carefully prized off a few scales from under the snake's chin, and even there it looked like a ton of work to cut through. They, too, went into the cauldron, which began blazing red. Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken, you will resurrect your foe. He finished, and Valde Lockhart started to move toward me with that knife. My time for stalling was up. The main thing that crossed through my mind was that Voldemort actually had put me in a Bond villain death trap. The gallows humor would have been funnier if I was certain I could get out of it. Pride goeth, it was time to try my plan to escape from the knife-wielding psychopaths before they could use my blood to revive Lord Voldemort. Important thing I'd realized was that, while Lockhart had seen a lot of what I could do in his classes, we'd mostly been practicing silent casting this year. As far as I knew, none of the Gryffindor tutors had shared with him that they'd also been teaching me to improve my focusless casting. Defindo, I muttered. Using the cutting charm barehanded had become second nature after months of using it for crafting work, but I had, specifically, originally learned it for just this kind of situation. After all, the first time Voldemort had come after me, I'd splinch myself trying to get out of being tied up. This was way safer. I felt the rope slacken holding me to the snake column and rolled away from the approaching possessed professor, managing to tag the ropes on my legs with another cutting charm as I went. On one rotation, I caught a look of surprise on his face. I was really pleased that he had a knife in hand rather than his wand, which gave me a chance. Sure enough, rather than going for his wand and just stunning me, he made an untrained lunge with the knife while cursing, "Dresden." Maybe neither Lockhart nor Riddle had actually done much stabbing, or maybe the carpet version wasn't running on the full competency set of Voldemort Prime. I was hoping for the latter, honestly. But I had been doing a fair amount of work to account for my long, awkward limbs after the last fight with a Voldemort-possessed professor. I managed to turn my sideways roll into a kneel and kick to my feet, jumping forward like off of a runner's starting block, and getting missed by the flailing knife attack. Rather than trying to get fancy with wandless summoning, I just juked around the boxes and snapped up my bracelet, amulet, and wand from the chair. Macnair was only starting to react to the unexpected change in circumstances. He honestly didn't seem to be that quick or smart. The possessed professor had finally switched his knife hand and drawn his wand, so I dove to the ground with a grunt, adding ground-delivered damage to my left shoulder on top of my frequent knee batterings, used the chair and boxes as cover, and aimed the unicorn horn focus at him. Libero! He got a shield up, and I was extra grateful that the apologies were just as unblockable as their dark magic counterparts. It flew right through and hit him in the throat, the telltale cerulean and silver spreading out and glowing out of his eyes. Honestly, the hard part had been summoning up pride in Lockhart, who may have been repeatedly memory charming me rather than admit he didn't know what he was doing. But he'd been an okay teacher despite that, and I was still a fan of his writing. With a look of shock in his eyes as the glow faded, Lockhart dropped the knife and used his hand to rip the diadem from his head and fling it as far away from him as he could. I heard it clatter against a wall closer to the front of the chamber. "What is?" he began, before Macnair wound up body checking him. I was dubious that the Scottish Death Eater had realized his ally had become an opponent, or if he just wasn't paying attention on the way to retrieving a weapon. Either way, he wound up knocking Lockhart into the crates and grabbing for his axe. Now the magical beast executioner getting his weapon was cause for concern, but I also realized that I was dangerously close to a snake, so big it looked like it might be able to swallow me whole. I risked a glance, and it still had its eyes closed, but seemed to be getting agitated at the noise. Did the Voldemort homunculus have enough awareness in the cauldron to give it orders? At least the version in the diadem hadn't thought of just telling the snake to stop me while it had the chance. Though I guess if they needed my blood, most of what the basilisk could do to me would rather ruin it for the purpose. Macnair had a crucial moment of realizing he just tackled what might well be a copy of his own boss, and Lockhart was still stunned by everything that was going on. So I used the opportunity to get some distance, retreating across the chamber and behind the columns. Before Macnair realized he needed to chase me, I managed to get my bracelet buckled around my wrist and my amulet back around my neck. I slipped my apologies focus back into my belt pouch, which they didn't seem to have noticed. Not that there was too much in there that would be useful. "Professor, get the Death Eater," I shouted as I peeked out to see the foppish adventurer obliviously picking himself up and dusting his robes off as Macnair charged me. "Mr. Dresden, oh dear, what a large snake." He practically squeaked. If he'd lost all memory since he was possessed, this was going to be a lot harder to handle. I didn't have the time to catch him up, and he had the only useful weapon between the two of us. "Macnair now, snake later," I screamed, grabbing randomly into a pocket on my belt and flinging a handful of iron nails at the Death Eater in question, which at least got him to shield his face while I broke cover and ran. I was really beginning to regret leaving my staff and rod at home. "I think it's coming back to me," Lockhart shouted at our backs. "Oh, I have a great hexer man in Italy showed me for hunting dark wizards, Nalite Tenebris." I didn't hear the sound of a spell firing. Maybe it was a different wand motion. "Just use a stunner or a knockback, something simple." I yelled back, the big Death Eater having trouble keeping up with my long legs as we raced around the damp stone floor. "Fine. Tarantellegra," He fired off a dancing jinx, which was at least something McNair had to worry about a little. He turned to shield, opening up my lead a little more, and importantly, getting me further from the snake who was writhing around, trying to understand what it was hearing. And was the red light from the cauldron getting brighter and louder? Oh, I'm remembering more. Did I kidnap you? Sorry about that. Mind control. What can you do? Lockhart blathered. You're sure the snake isn't the biggest problem? Rictus Sempra, Glacius. He managed to toss off a couple more jinxes, making McNair realize he had a bigger annoyance to flatten. Not unless someone gives it an order, probably. I answered, pausing behind a column opposite where I'd started and beginning to search my belt pouches for anything that would be useful to fight a person. I really should have made more irrumpant potion. I hadn't thought I'd need holdouts like that once I was legal to cast magic without the trace. Lead shot and iron nails, not so useful without a staff to banish them at people. A couple of pieces of Remus, silverware, slightly promising but not ideal. Snacks, at least I wouldn't starve to death. Girding and strengthening potions. They'd help if I could convince McNair to wrestle, but didn't help against blades and spells. Various crafting cuttings that I was too broke to throw out. My money. Some kind of cloth, bag, or shirt that I didn't remember stuffing into the back left pouch. No help. Well, good then. I think this will make a hell of a next novel. Impedimenta. Lockhart began dancing backwards, circling the brightly glowing cauldron, McNair gamely chasing him like it was an old slapstick sketch. Of course, when I tell it, it will be me rescuing you, you understand. Flypendo, that's just what my readers expect. Happy to back your version, just stop McNair. I insisted, though I rather worried that maybe he'd been memory charming other people that had a contradictory version of the events in his stories. Right, my version, Obliviate. He nailed the Death Eater with what might actually have been his only proficient higher difficulty spell. McNair slowed and went slack-jawed. Okay, great. Now Dresden, oh, there you are. While I appreciate the approval, I'd rather tie up the loose end. You understand? I was already shielding against the incoming memory charm when the cauldron exploded. Snake eyes, the cauldron went off like a pipe bomb. Most potions were already dangerous when left on the heat for too long. Being part of a dark magic revivification ritual couldn't have made this one less temperamental. Even with my shield up, I was flung back into the wall behind me and briefly staggered. Lockhart and McNair at ground zero didn't stand a chance. Unfortunately, the basilisk was also fine. It was far enough away and tough enough that it hissed in pain from being hit by explosively accelerated cauldron chunks, but didn't actually seem to be harmed, even though the crates and chair half the distance between ground zero and the snake were reduced to splinters. Good snake. Nice snake. Simple, stupid snake made of super durable, magic-resistant scales that wouldn't come after me without orders. Right. I felt bad for Lockhart. The guy may have turned out to be a prick, but his fans, at least, would have deserved an open casket funeral. My brain was already considering this a victory while shifting toward how to get out of this room without inspiring the basilisk to think of me as a target. But then I heard it. After enough encounters, I was discovering that Voldemort as a wraith almost had a particular noise, like barely heard horror movie ghostly sound effects. So I wasn't exactly surprised to see the black, smoky form congeal out of the haze of flash-evaporated potion fumes where the cauldron had been. He actually spent a moment taking stock of the near crater he appeared in, working out what must have happened. After a moment, his eyes, deeper dark pools within the spectral form, looked toward me and his unearthly voice explained, "I hate you, SSS, so much. Actually, you're not even at the top of my list, man." I shrugged, pulling out my apologies focus so I could summon a patronus if he tried to possess me again. Kind of hard to hate someone who you've seen as a creepy baby. Pitiful, really. McGonagall was going to be so mad I was still needling the guy. Hopefully she'd survived and would be able to chastise me. I figured, though, maybe if more people had brought him down a peg over the years, he'd have been less of a megalomaniac. "You think you've won," he glowered. "But with no Dumbledore and no need to be SS subtle, why SS shouldn't I unleash destruction upon Hogwarts? Let the basilisk reign until I am, inevitably, rested." Well, crap, I kind of hoped he couldn't command the big snake in this form. I tried a stalling tactic. And just how sure are you that there's no Dumbledore? The guy's a planner. Doesn't share information. This whole thing could be to put someone in position to find your chamber of secrets and end the threat of your monster once and for all. Honestly, after saying it, it didn't seem that far out of the realm of possibility. During the previous attack, Fox had showed up so fast that I couldn't even really be sure the headmaster had been truly paralyzed. I hadn't seen it for myself, and even if he was, surely he'd had a plan for if someone managed to take him out. We done okay with the rest of the old crowd at the Wisengamot with him missing. With the old crowd at the Wisengamot, where Moody had happened to bump into me on the side, where I'd felt some cloth object I didn't remember putting in my belt. I yanked the cloth bundle that I'd passed over a minute before out with my left hand, glancing down at what unfurled into the sorting hat. The hell? I baffled, shrugging and pulling the thing onto my head. I thought at it, "Hey, hat, do you know what's going on? Took you long enough." The seemingly sapient magic clothing graveled at me. No weapons, facing down great danger, no plan, making jokes even though you're terrified. That's about what we expected. Take this, then put me back on. Ow! I winced as something metal and heavy clocked me on the top of the head. I yanked the hat off, stowed my focus, and drew a whole freaking broadsword out of the undetectable extension charm that was apparently part of the hat. It was gleaming, rune-etched silver and festooned with rubies, but seemed no less deadly for the ostentation. The name Godric Gryffindor was distinct from the enchanting runes etched by the hilt. Well, that was cool. The SS sword, Voldemort hissed. The last treasure I couldn't find. We will take it from your corpse. And with that, hissing in that echoing magic that seemed to command the basilisk, the wraith dived at its head. Great. A Voldemort-possessed giant snake was even worse than him giving it orders. I pulled the hat back on my head, and it told me, "Yank me down around your eyes." I did so, and suddenly the room went from true sight to an almost painted scene. It was like the hat was sending me a colorful sketch of what it saw in the room. And the hat was just a clever magical object, not a person, so it could look at basilisk eyes all day without a problem. It took me a few stumbling steps to adjust to seeing the room as interpreted by Dan Bluth, but the hat could also apparently see in the dark, so that made it a lot easier to get a sense of the whole room. Long chamber, snake columns to either side, Slytherin carving at the far end, exit at the other end. Worth a shot. The immense, possessed snake began to build its implacable momentum as I ran, trying to juke between columns to get it to follow me. But with Voldemort driving, it wasn't easy to fake out. All the slalom did was slow me down. I broke right and dashed across the floor, hoping it at least couldn't corner well in all that bulk, sword held out to the side, trying not to cut my own legs off. It was a cool weapon, but I'd prefer a focus. It is a focus, Dresden, the hat told me, sarcastically. Right, thinking back to the very first time I'd met McGonagall and explained my problems with wands, Dumbledore had mentioned that Godric Gryffindor preferred to cast with sword and rod. And if this was the sword depulso, I incanted, hoping to banish myself ahead. And it worked, maybe better than my staff. I sent myself on a mighty, flailing leap across the chamber, which was good because the snake could corner pretty fast. I even stuck the landing, with a bit of a stumble on the wet stones. But the hat-augmented vision of the other end of the chamber showed two immense stone doors shut fast and no obvious way to exit. I could maybe knock them open with some blasting charms, but not while being chased by the snake. Without Voldemort driving, I'd have tried to dive at the last second to see if I could get it to crush open the doors, but with how he cornered, it seemed unlikely. Okay, what did I have? Lots of room to maneuver for both me and the giant snake, check. Magic sword that worked as a focus for unknown spells, check. Magic hat that protected me from basilisk vision, but not its terrifying bulk, magic resistance, or venom that couldn't be neutralized by anything short of a phoenix, check. Look, you're going to have to put some of your own work in, grumbled the hat, following my mental checklist. Any ideas on what kind of spells Godric could cast with the sword rather than the rod? I thought at it, while banishing myself at another oblique angle into the side of the room I'd started tied up in. What spells did they even have back then? It's goblin forged, the hat offered. It increases in power by being used in battle and imbibes that which strengthens it, so it's likely picked up some new tricks when it's had to be used against other wizards over the years. But mostly sword-relevant magic, so only slightly cheatery. I thought at the hat. If this counts as inheriting, Probably very good against werewolves, too. I mused about the silver blade before getting down to it. Wild Bill and I had been working on what spells a knife could use for Millicent's focus all year, so I had some ideas. Defindo. I tried, lashing against a snake column as I ran past. It indeed left a mighty gash in the stone, but not nearly deep enough to topple it on the snake in the time I had available. Sectum Sempra. I tried, not quite blindly trying Snape's spell on the beast hissing like an angry locomotive behind me. It again worked, but even the powerful cutting curse splashed off of the snake's magic-resistant scales. I was running out of room on my side of the gallery, and I nearly tripped in detritus from the cauldron explosion, including some organic bits I probably shouldn't think much about. Running out between the columns, I banished myself again, barely clearing a shallow pool of water where the ground of the chamber had settled near Salazar Slytherin, which gave me a moment to try Wild Bill's favorite trick, Focus Retractum. The variation on the season pull charm allowed me to fling the sword at the snake, still connected by a line of light that would let me yank it back. It definitely bit into a scale, but didn't slide in like butter as I'd hoped. The basilisk reared up and roared. Snakes shouldn't be able to roar. I also didn't cut my arm off as I willed the sword to return to my hand along its magical tether, so that was a bonus. As it reared back, I remembered the scales that had been prized off from beneath its head for the ritual. Hat, double-check me here, is this really dumb? I wondered. Maybe it wavered. It's no dumber than things I remember Godric doing. There's a reason I put you in the house I did. With that ringing endorsement for ye olde Gryffindor stupidity echoing through my brain, I did the last thing any wizard expects, even when they aren't currently piloting a multi-ton death machine. I charged. Now, I knew a little bit of how to use a sword in theory from Moody's melee combat lessons, which, I groaned internally as I realized, were also likely preparing me for this eventuality. And my battle cry was, Lumos Salem, to cause my amulet to blaze with a light as bright as sunlight. It didn't seem to quite unravel the dark magic of the snake as well as true sunlight, but it certainly made it unhappy enough to avert its eyes and rear further back. So this wasn't really a St. George and the Dragon situation, I told myself. Maybe an Alice and the Jabberwock situation. Don't get crushed. Don't get bitten. Sword goes there. Snicker snack. My height was a big asset with how high the snake had pulled its head up, and I managed to nail the right spot. The handy little targeting circle the hat painted onto the vision was also extremely helpful. With the missing scales, the blade slid in with only a little desperate pressure and into the skull above, which was fortunately less protected against magic swords than the outer armor. I thought I faintly heard a venom sac pop in the roof of the basilisk's mouth, then the silver went right into its brain, and I only got slightly hit by the suddenly spasming snake head. It certainly didn't nail me hard enough to fling me several yards onto the hard floor where I narrowly avoided a concussion. That was a tactical retreat, and nobody can prove otherwise, except maybe the hat. I'm pretty sure he's not allowed to share other people's secrets. Regardless, I skittered back some more. A 50-foot-long, multi-ton snake in its death throes is not something you want to be anywhere near. It was also flinging caustic venom out of the corners of its stapled-shut mouth. I hastily shielded just to be sure nothing spattered me. Finally, the basilisk stopped struggling and went still, the head almost upside down on the floor, offering me the sword of Gryffindor like some particularly gruesome Excalibur. But this time I was ready and not willing to give Voldemort another chance for mischief. So rather than walking up, I fished out the unicorn horn focus and summoned my patroness. See you next time. I waved mockingly to the shadowy wraith that extricated itself from the body before Mouse once again gave a silent bark, the wash of patroness energy expelling the evil spirit from Hogwarts for the second time in less than a year. They should have been paying me fees as a ghostbuster, I swear. The Lion Witch and the wardrobe checking that the eyes of the snake were well and permanently closed. I pulled the sorting hat back up to normal hat position and adjusted to the dim light in the room again as I painfully pulled myself to my feet. Maybe, I mused, I should actually check in with Madame Pomfrey before I shook some important tendons fully loose. It took my foot and some leverage to yank the sword out of the snake and prove myself the true and rightful king of the Chamber of Secrets. I watched as greenish poison disappeared into the blade, while the blood and brain matter just slewed off, once again leaving a pristine weapon. You said something about imbibing that which strengthens it. So does this thing have basilisk venom powers now? Could be. Might have had them before. The hat basically gave me a verbal shrug. I just hang on to it between outings, and I'm not always kept up to date on what it's been doing. Fair enough, I told him as I limped over to retrieve Ravenclaw's diadem. You want another Founder's artifact to add to your collection? Hover me over it, the hat suggested, and I did so, not exactly keen to even touch the mind-controlling artifact if I didn't have to. The hat wriggled away when it got within an inch, and I popped it back on my own head. Whatever that is, I don't want it in me. Either cleanse it or destroy it. I seriously thought about trying to destroy it right there. But I knew one very talented Ravenclaw witch who would be extremely upset with me if I didn't give her the chance to cleanse her house's artifact. And honestly, as far as we'd gotten on our next sulfur spell, I thought there might be a chance it could work. So instead, I gingerly used my unicorn horn focus to pick it up and drop it into the belt pouch that had previously held the hat. And I guessed I'd have to use tongs to pull it back out. I certainly wasn't putting my hand in. From there, it was just the boring process of escaping from the Chamber of Secrets. Without a basilisk chasing me, it really wasn't that difficult. Tom Riddle had been about my age when he'd made the thing after all, so the doors weren't exactly spell-reinforced. If I'd had my blasting rod, I would have been out in moments. Instead, it took a couple minutes to chalk the exploding charm as a ritual circle on the door. Worked rather like a shaped charge. Then it took me another few minutes to transfigure a hole through the cave-in the magical explosion had caused in the next room. Young Tom Riddle had apparently not studied structural engineering. A little more hiking through the cave system, and I had to groan. Really, a giant slide. I guessed it was easier on the basilisk than stairs, but still. The next time I talked to the guy, I was going to ask him if he said "we" every time he visited. Fortunately, the sword was able to support enough motion-related spells that I was able to basically banish myself up the slide. I am a powerful wizard, officially an adult, and very serious about. I can't even try to finish that sentence. Of course I said, "we." One more chalked ritual-shaped charge, and I emerged from the door above the slide into Myrtle's bathroom. Chunks of the non-functional sink and its neighbors littered the floor, and I suddenly realized how much I'd overcomplicated my search for the basilisk. It wasn't a special snake room that I needed to find other instances of. It was a kid going, "I put the snake behind this one." I wanted to kick myself, but I thought Myrtle was going to do it for me. "Harry Dresden, you blew up my loo." I tried to strike a heroic pose with the sword. "I killed the basilisk that killed you, more or less." The floating ghost stared at me for a moment through her giant glasses before finally nodding. "Well, okay then. But I want it fixed." "Yes, ma'am," I nodded. Honestly, Filch might be more angry at me. Not long after leaving the bathroom, I ran into Mathilda and the Weasley twins, who had been having their own adventure dealing with Nott and the Imperiused Professor Belby. That all sorted, I limped up to the 7th floor after the three of them, all of us hoping to find Professor McGonagall in the room of requirement. The fact that the door was still there gave me some hope that the room didn't consider itself empty. "This place is a mess," Mathilda exclaimed, upon catching a look at it. "How are we going to find her?" I oriented myself and said, "I think it was over this way," before heading off to where I thought the Isle of Cabinets had been before it got crushed beneath a sea of detritus. Hoping we were digging in the right place, the four of us made quick work of the pile, more because of the three of them, who could easily cast levitation charms. The most precise I could get was banishing boxes off the top with the sword. We finally unearthed the wardrobe-sized piece of furniture that I thought I'd seen her fly into. Hoping I wasn't about to discover her mangled body, I carefully opened the doors. I felt a pop of magic and was sure the professor just appeared as I opened the door. She even fell an inch or so to hit the back wall, currently laying mostly horizontal on the pile of trash. "That was powerfully strange," she opined, blinking away disorientation. "Did you meet Mr. Tumnus?" I asked. Mathilda didn't even get that reference, though I was sure the Chronicles of Narnia would do for a movie adaptation one of these days. "This isn't a wardrobe, Hoss," McGonagall scoffed at me. I was surprised she got the reference, though I guess the books must have come out when she was fairly young. I think this might be a vanishing cabinet, actually, she decided, after looking it over. Fortunately broken, or who knows where I could have ended up. Still, probably not safe to have inside the school. That the sword of Gryffindor, she boggled, finally noticing what I was holding. Turns out there was a 2-for-1 sale on Founder's relics. I joked, then asked, more seriously, I guess that means you weren't in on Dumbledore's plan to turn me into a basilisk slayer. He left notes to make sure I got the hat to Alastair. She nodded at my headwear, but I'd hoped that was just for planning purposes. Do you mean to tell me that Albus planned for you to fight a basilisk with a sword? I shrugged. Seems like it. When we get that old man unparalyzed, she growled. Taking in the amusement of 4 of her students, she stepped the rest of the way out of the broken vanishing cabinet, visibly got control of her temper, and asked, Is everyone all right? Lockhart didn't make it, I told her, mostly regretfully. Professor Belby may need to go to the infirmary. For miscellaneous prank item damage, Mathilda shrugged. We're both injured and traumatized, Fred suggested, though he looked perfectly fine. We'll probably need at least a week off of classes, George grinned. Then it's fortunate you have a week left for your holidays then, the professor deadpanned, clearly realizing everything was basically fine if the twins could try to skive off classes. Shame about poor Gilderoy. Albus will be upset he didn't fix the wards in time. To be fair, he was trying to memory charm me to pretend he had been the one to defeat the basilisk, before the basilisk had actually been defeated. He'd apparently been doing that all year every time I gave him some advice about his class. I explained. That took her aback a bit, then she just shook her head. Well, let's add that to the list of things for Poppy to check out. Follow me to the infirmary, all. I'll award points when we're all feeling better. As she started to lead the way, she muttered, too low for the other 3 to hear, defense professors. At least I already know what's wrong with Remus. Hey, he was memory charming me. I suddenly realized as I followed her out for the long trek down to the hospital wing. I probably won all those practice duels with Lockhart. Chapter 27, Dark Room 13, Downtime. Chapter text flying colors. The last few months at school went surprisingly easily, with the latest Death Eater plot handled. Remus, newly signed mastery certificate in hand, went ahead and took over as defense professor at McGonagall's insistence. He and Kettleburn both took students for their classes down to see the basilisk corpse several times. Kettleburn's lessons for creatures class were all about the various properties of the giant snake and helping take samples before it fully degraded as the magic animating it faded away. Remus. It was hard to remember to call him Professor Lupin. Lessons were mostly about how one should run far, far away if they thought something like that was even in the area. He stared really judgingly at me when he showed it to my class. While Hogwarts wasn't exactly running out of space, McGonagall still took some trips with her newt classes to fix up the Chamber of Secrets into something that wasn't in danger of collapsing and possibly creating a giant sinkhole under the castle. Once Dumbledore was unparalyzed, the plan was to also tie it more firmly into the wards to prevent it being a potential backdoor into the school. The twins were distraught when she also made an executive decision as acting headmistress to finally take Moody's advice and close up the rest of the secret passages out of the school. I half suspected the headmaster might reopen some of them when he awoke. After all, his plans probably often included students entering or leaving the school when no one but him was aware of it. Was right after someone had been paralyzed and insensate for 3 months too soon to pick a fight with him about being a manipulative old bastard. I asked myself that question a lot while I waited for Mandrake juicing day. Fortunately, I had a lot of things to distract me of the non-life-threatening variety. My own classes continued to be very interesting, and the 6th-year tests went on your report card. But, well, I was my own guardian even if I cared. They were mostly to make sure you were on track for the newts. However, the owls were upcoming for the 5th years, so I spent a ton of time helping my girlfriend study and or relax. Fine, yes, I finally admitted Mathilda was my girlfriend, fully expecting that would be the point everything would go horribly wrong. I thought it was about to happen one night in the library in mid-May. It had turned out that Pince being absent didn't make that much of a difference, at least this close to exams. If you made too much noise, the 7th years, 5th years, or Hermione would make sure you understood what a mistake that was. So I was very quietly quizzing Mathilda on her defense notes at our favorite corner table when Maeve sashayed by. "Ah, Harry," she smirked, ignoring Mathilda, putting every ounce of vampiness she could into it and turning her aura to fully aroused then flash freeze, she said, "I really appreciated seeing your giant snake the other day. When do you think we can go down again and take another tour of the Chamber of Secrets?" She'd never really let off the rumor war, but I'd been basically untouchable as the slayer of Slytherin's monster. Maybe people still believed that I was having an affair with the Malfoy princess, but they didn't make a big deal about it if I wanted to deny it. So I guessed she decided to make a targeted insinuation in front of Mathilda. For a while I'd been wondering how breaking me up with my girlfriend suited the inscrutable goals of the Unseelie. Then I started to realize that maybe Maeve was just awful. She was doing this purely because I wouldn't do what she wanted. At this moment, pinned beneath the weight of her she-aura of impassable allure, I was having to use all my willpower not to buckle under and molest her right in the library. It left very little energy for telling her off and reassuring Mathilda. But that didn't seem to be necessary. Mathilda was a blur of red and gold as she was suddenly right in Maeve's face. I wasn't sure how she was even functioning under the aura, but maybe she'd worked up a tolerance over the last several months. In an extremely angry but dangerously quiet voice, she insisted, "Listen, you manky mingy muppet, tin lawn catch you. Go find some more Slytherin boys to tease. I don't know what your deal is. I don't care. Does I FFWCO die hun?" I asked. The temperature was so cold that frost patterns started forming on nearby solid surfaces, Mathilda's breath steaming into a cloud around Maeve's head, almost like she was breathing fire. The Fey princess was almost as still as the basilisk victims, eyes slowly widening as if nobody had ever talked to her like that. I didn't speak Welsh, but I assumed Maeve did, and it hadn't sounded nice. Ever so slowly, she turned to look at me, madness spinning behind those eyes, looking like she was working up to something. She lost control of the come-hither aura, and I could finally speak, so I interrupted whatever she was about to say. "I warned you about this before. You just attacked us. You've been attacked back. I'll consider the matter settled if you do." She didn't exactly acknowledge it, but she didn't say what she'd been clearly winding up. Instead, the temperature gradually rose until she had mastered herself to give me one curt nod and then walk away. I didn't think the matter was really settled, especially since we were off behind some shelves but not completely private, and I already heard muttering from kids that had been watching and were going to pass it on. "Thilda, that was awesome and hot and amazing, but—" I quietly started everything I wanted to warn her about snapping behind the stupid Fey immunity to giving away their secrets. "But I just started a fight with a she nodded, a little shell-shocked, moving around to my side of the table and collapsing into my lap, her adrenaline crashing. "How?" I couldn't even finish the question. I hated this gesh, and it was going up my list of research to break. "Oh, Luna told me a while ago. I didn't really believe her, until now." She pulled my arms around her, and the warm contact was especially nice in the still frigid corner. "You know there's nothing going on between me and Maeve, right?" "Well, nothing is a strong word. There's clearly something you can't talk about." As she explained her theories, I was able to manage a nod around the prohibitions. "And I want to figure it out. I want to figure out what it is you can't tell me. But I get it. You're not friends. She's a bad fairy." "I'm worried about you being on her list," I said. "I am too. I don't want to fight bad fairies. I don't want there to be bad fairies. I want to finish my exams. I want to become a respected magizoologist." I sighed, "The more you stick around me." "No, you stop." She barely managed to keep her voice intense but low, turning in my lap and looking me dead in the eyes from a couple inches away. "I knew you were dangerous. You didn't trick me. I could have walked away after the wolves. After the Death Eaters. Hell's bells. In barely more than a year of having known her, her life had been in danger how many times? It only took one bad wizard and one misplaced dark fire spell to do for Elaine, and Mathilda was now up against a queen of the freaking she on my account. I had to. I said stop. "I see your brain working, Harry Dresden. You spend all this effort protecting people. Who protects you? Your friends. Maybe sometimes you have to fight you-know-who alone. Sometimes there's a big snake. And if I could have, I'd have been there. I'd have had your back. I'd have probably wet myself, but I'd have had your back. It was hard, having someone that close, that intense, peering directly into me. It wasn't even love. I didn't think we were there yet. It was friendship, which was even harder to deny. Somehow, I'd been putting in the investment, and other people were investing back. As an orphan that had only had one close friend, who'd ultimately betrayed me in the worst way, it was hard to understand. It was one thing to realize you were willing to go the extra mile to protect the innocent. It was another to realize that they appreciated it. I tried one last, half-hearted. I mean, a basilisk is one thing. That's just magizoology. But Maeve, so what if she's some secret, powerful she that drips sex and snow? Mathilda shrugged, smirking playfully through her own, obvious anxiety about it, dropping deep into her Welsh accent. I'll smack that balmy ferret right in her pretty garb. She keeps coming after my man. Mandrake juice in the final Quidditch match of the year. Ginny didn't quite edge out Katie Killick, the soon-to-be graduating Hufflepuff seeker, for the snitch. But it was so close on points that Gryffindor wound up winning the Quidditch Cup, even though Hufflepuff took the match. Obviously overjoyed, but not content to rest on his laurels, Oliver was already planning how to get Ginny a better broom for the next year, even as Gryffindor kicked off an epic party for our first win of the cup in years. After all the points, McGonagall had eventually settled on for saving the school from basilisks and Death Eaters. We were basically guaranteed to win the House Cup as well, if you cared about that kind of thing. I'd overheard the twins doing math to figure out how many pranks they could get caught for and still not blow our lead by the leaving feast. Personally, I figured that a budget for getting away with shenanigans was an even better use for the points I'd earned than getting house-colored banners at the end of the year. Sneakily, the staff had scheduled the completion and delivery of the Mandrake restorative draft to the victims of the basilisk to occur during the match. I imagined the celebration in the Hufflepuff common room for their match win was intensified just as much by Beatrice, Haywood returning as Gryffindor's celebration about the cup burst into even higher gear when Dean Thomas walked into the common room. I mostly figured they'd done it that way to give Dumbledore a day to recover before I started bothering him for answers. He finally saw me while the fifth years were in their second day of owls. I dropped the sword of Gryffindor, the sorting hat, and the diadem of Ravenclaw, safely wrapped on his desk, then sat back in the chair across his desk. How much of that was planned? The old wizard shrugged, though clearly pleased to regard the 3 artifacts I'd brought. Less than you imagine, I'm sure. Tom Riddle makes plans. Plans require everything to proceed in order, or they begin to fall apart. As I reached a certain age, I began to prefer putting many strategic goals into motion. The trick is to keep them from interfering with one another. You weren't just faking being paralyzed, I suggested. If he had been, he probably wouldn't have kept up the charade for another month and a half. Regrettably, no. I'd expected some kind of play to force me out of the school politically. I'm actually not sure why they didn't leverage Lucius to use the school board. If I'd been available, I could have directed Fawkes to find you and bring help. I'm very glad Alastair and Minerva remembered the fallbacks. I don't like being a chess piece, I practically growled. It might have had more effect if I'd had a few more years of work on my facial hair and any hope at all of beating him in a fight. Mr. Dresden, Harry, the old man stared me down. I regret to inform you that it was not I that gave you this status. If I've arranged the board to provide you the opportunity to go where you prefer rather than where you are directed, it doesn't mean that I am the one whose hand is upon your back. That hurt. Justin, my godmother, Voldemort, Maeve, even Umbridge. I had to admit, at least Dumbledore was right that his manipulations seemed to result in things I wanted to happen anyway. I must have stared back at him for a whole minute, not worried about meeting his eyes. The few secrets I still had from him, I pretty much couldn't divulge even if I wanted to, so what did I have to fear from his mind reading? Finally, I just said, I want to be included, not manipulated, and you need to delegate more anyway, sir. Everything could have fallen apart with you taken out. The Order of the Phoenix, he smiled, revealing the name of his old crowd, has more autonomy than even they believe. After all, I hear I was unnecessary to the defeat of Delors' legislation, and clearly, he just gestured at the artifacts I'd brought him. Seeing me tense up, he raised a hand. But yes, while I still worry about others trying to push you where they will, it's clear you will fight for the same things upon which the Order was founded. I'll see you are included when next we meet. Mollified, I nodded, then said, Penny wants to try to finish developing the next apology and see if we can clear the diadem. Certainly, though under my strict observation. Even from here, I feel it reaching out, trying to convince me to put it on. I cannot allow it to be with students unsupervised. Fair. You know, he probably hid it in the school when he was here for the job interview, or had someone slip it in about the same time. It was Beetle's error. Dumbledore merely smirked, though I thought he might not know what a beetle was and would be doing research later to pretend to be all-knowing. It's way more intelligent than a magical portrait. There's no form of memory encoding I'm aware of that could do what that thing did. And you have theories, Harry? The old man prompted, was switching to a first-name basis, just familiarity or acknowledgement that I'd become an adult, not just his student. I suggested something I've been thinking about for a while. Arcanos has 3 major monsters that can turn you to stone, but only one that's an undying wizard you just can't kill for good until you destroy the gem in which it's hidden its soul. That actually got a widening of his eyes. Arcanos is a muggle fantasy game, yes. I nodded, and he went on. It's surprising that such information has percolated through myth, though we've worked so hard to prevent the wizarding world from rediscovering it. If I give you a topic of research, can you actually keep it from spreading all the way through Gryffindor and Ravenclaw within a week? This knowledge is dangerous. Like Penny says, sir, security through obscurity never works, I smirked. But I won't spread it around on purpose. He sighed, then explained. Then look up the tale of Herpo the Foul. If anyone asks, it will be because he was the first to breed a basilisk. However, you're actually looking for the secret of his long life. You could just tell me, I shrugged. Knowledge earned is firmer held than knowledge gifted, Dumbledore smiled. And you need something to do while your friends sit their exams. If I find what I think I'm going to find, should we go ahead and smash the diadem, even though Penny wants to purify it? An ordered mind is not fully incapacitated by the basilisk's gaze. I found that being paralyzed gave me ample time to think. Our enemy did not call all his minions in his weakness. It's a creepy baby, not a look that inspires loyalty, I interjected. Quite, but in his diminished state, I cannot believe that he would risk placing his source of immortality so fully within my grasp rather than draw upon other resources. If we put the clues together about poor Irma earlier, we could have easily rent his soul adrift were this its only anchor. So that's not his phylactery. That's not the term, he corrected. But I believe, if it is, it may not be the only one. I suddenly remembered and pointed at the sword. He said that was the last treasure he couldn't find. Finally, the old man gave me a genuine nod that I'd given him information he hadn't been aware of course. There were rumors of his career after graduation, appraising artifacts for Borgin and Burks, and strange deaths before he quit. If he was seeking artifacts of the founders, that is a vital thread to unravel. We both sat, thinking, for a few minutes. One from each house plus his core. I thought out loud, finally. He wouldn't stop at 5 unless he had to. 3 or 7 would be far more stable, Dumbledore agreed. I may need to consult those that might have inadvertently helped him with his research. If he started after Hogwarts, he could have learned the techniques anywhere, but if he began while in this school, I may have a place to start. I'll do my own research, I agreed, thinking about Bob. And we'll let you know when we're ready to test the exorcism charm. I appreciate everything you've done, Harry, and I'm glad you came through it whole. I regret that I cannot promise I won't ask similar of you in the future. As long as I get a say in where I'm getting pushed, I shrugged. He twinkled at me and asked, when has anyone ever pushed you in a direction you didn't wish to travel for long, Harry Dresden? Now, I believe Irma has recovered and wants to thank you as herself for your efforts improving the fiction section in the library. It turned out she did. And also, she wanted me to spend all afternoon finding all the Muggle literature the twins and I had haphazardly shelved and move it to her new Muggle fiction section. Some of those paperbacks I'd hidden back in October. I didn't even remember where they were. Afraid not. And then whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Seamus gestured with his nearly complete blasting rod, pantomiming for the enchanting club. That spider was on fire, and that one, and another one. They'll enter mess wire Finnegan again. Ron was also a huge help, Neville explained, once Seamus got it out of his system, for all that he was terrified. He was just sniping any that got too close to one of us. Left unsaid was that he was probably hiding under the invisibility cloak, which at least a few people in the room might not have actually found out about yet. The way the kids couldn't keep a secret, it was only a matter of time. You're underselling yourself, as always, Neville, Hermione chided. Without you using freezing charms to slow them down and bunch them up, the ones in the back could have easily overwhelmed us. For my own part, I found that my issues with accuracy were largely mitigated by having such a target-rich environment. Like fish in a barrel, Seamus chortled. Percy, who had been going increasingly pale as the kids detailed their adventure into the forest while I'd been fighting the basilisk, turned to me and asked, "Harry, is my hair going grey?" I made a show of inspecting it, then shook my head. Not that it wouldn't have a good reason. It had taken over a month, until the last enchanting club of the year, for us to finally get the kids to cough up why they hadn't been around even though they'd been on campus when everything was going down during my fight with the basilisk. Turned out they'd been running to get Hagrid to help fight off the invaders, noticed the ministry arresting him, and for some reason listened to him when he told them to follow the spiders. It found the semi-friendly and all-grown-up talking spider that Hagrid had raised all those years before Aragog. They'd also found that the van-sized invertebrate had been breeding for 50 years. The few acromantulas that I'd run into were just a tiny fraction of the seething horde of the things, and the younger spiders weren't exactly willing to pass up a free meal of 4 children. I felt like a bad friend. I hadn't even realized Hagrid had been arrested over suspicion that he was behind the attacks. Since he'd been blamed for the last time, he was the #1 suspect this time as far as the ministry was concerned. It didn't surprise me at all to hear that Dawlish had been primary aura at the arrest. At least the indisputable presence of the basilisk corpse saw Hagrid fully exonerated. McGonagall had seen to that. "I am going to say this very carefully," Percy began, his skin going from pale to flushed. "And understand that I say this to you as your prefect. The words I will have with Ron later as his brother will be much stronger. Hagrid is a very nice man. He is a fixture of Hogwarts who never means for anyone to get hurt. But he is a terrible judge of danger. Why would you go scrambling off into the forbidden forest by yourselves? What foolishness could have compelled you? You were fighting a horde of class quintuplex creatures. You easily could have died. A whole squad of hit wizards could have died." That finally punctured the invincible pride the kids were feeling, and Neville admitted, "Yeah, if the unicorns hadn't shown up to give us a ride out, I don't think we would have made it." At least that probably meant the school's student-protecting fortune wards worked all the way into the forest. I was thinking what to add when Draco piped up. "I'll speak to my father about getting funding to clear them out of the forest." Hagrid, I could tell the boy had wanted to call him that oaf, should have warned someone about this decades ago. A whole army of acromantula right next to the school. Honestly. "Where did the second one come from?" Luna asked, in her usual non-sequitur. We all looked at her and she explained, "You know who told Harry that he used Hagrid as a scapegoat, so he knew about the acromantula. He probably brought in a female for this Aragog to mate with so he could be sure there would be an army of dark creatures in the forest. He might have already had a female, since he had the venom he used to kill Myrtle." As conspiracy theories went, that was rather coherent. I suggested, "You should write that up for the Quibbler, Luna. Maybe it would help Mr. Malfoy convince the right people in the ministry that it's a problem." Everyone nodded, and I saw Draco make a connection about the utility of being friends with a reporter, even if it was a 12-year-old who wrote for a tabloid. "I could get pictures," Colin grinned. "No, Colin," everyone told him all at once. After the club finally started to wander off back to various common rooms, I noticed Draco hanging back. "What's up?" I asked. "I have a friend who'd like to talk to you," the boy explained. "He should be waiting for us across the way." Only slightly worried about another trap, I nodded to Draco, but caught Percy's eye on the way out. My roommate gave me a thumbs up that he would hang around just in case. Or maybe he gave me a thumbs up that I was politicking with the Malfoys. Sometimes it's hard to tell with that guy. Either way, he knew who'd seen me last if I didn't make it back to the tower. But the classroom Draco led us into was empty save for Theodore Nott, Draco's year mate, who had been acting like he wanted to talk to me all year. Made a guess as I saw him. Going to have a better summer without a Voldemort homunculus hiding out in your house this year. His eyes widened. How did? Acting like you were all-knowing was like cocaine for wizards. No better high. It honestly explained a lot about Dumbledore. Well, frankly, yes. I wanted to apologize for not warning you earlier, and thank you for the assistance. The boy's voice was high, starting to crack with puberty, and he was likely to be a beanpole like Ron and Neville soon. His polished way of speaking was at odds with his affected slouch, trying to not be too much of a pureblood maybe. No worries, man, I told him. I know what it's like to have a dark wizard for a mentor. Technically, I knew what it was like to have two between Justin and my godmother. You don't really know what they'd do to you if you stepped out of line. He sighed with relief that I got it. I want you to know that you don't have to worry about me. If my father orders me to do something to you, I'll just tell him it's too risky. He shrugged. It really is. You killed all three of them and the basilisk. Well, not all at once. I tried to give a nonchalant shrug. It probably wouldn't hurt to let Slytherin House continue to think I was an unstoppable badass. It's cool that we're not enemies. Let me know if you need any direct help getting out if it gets bad again. Surprised at the extra offer of help, the boy simply nodded his thanks, then waved goodbye as he slipped out of the room. As soon as he was out of earshot, Draco said, "Speaking of," I nodded for him to continue. "If you wind up going on any extended field trips this summer, I'd like to come along." I didn't really have any firm plans. My friends had talked about maybe taking a trip before senior year. Remus hadn't been able to keep secret from me for long that he'd gone ahead and gotten the prince's potions distributed to wizarding bookstores, and I saw a pretty staggering bit of profit for a teenager, a lot of which I'd shared with Percy and Penny. So, despite being habitually broke, we might actually be able to pull something off. I hadn't considered taking any younger kids, but the way the Weasley family worked, it was probably inevitable. "You're okay going on a trip that might be mostly Gryffindors. Your father is okay with it?" I asked. "He suggested it," Draco drawled, "at least after I had reservations about spending all summer in a house with my aunts." I sucked in a breath. I hadn't even thought about that. Having Bellatrix Lestrange secretly camping in your house was already probably stressful as hell. Having her and Maeve would be like renting a room in Arkham Asylum. "Are your parents going to be okay?" He nodded. "Mother is protected by her sister's goodwill. Father is able to handle them. It's honestly not dangerous, really. I'd just rather be almost anywhere else when they're around." He remembered something. "Of course, I can contribute sufficient funds to pay my way and more, which might elevate the kind of holiday you can manage." I decided not to be offended. The kid had expensive tastes. "Got it. You'll pay to bump us up so you're not stuck in whatever flop house we decided to stay in to save money." I thought about it for a second. It could be a Malfoy plot, but I didn't think Lucius would put his son in any danger, and Draco was worse at espionage than his friend Nott, so I didn't think he was knowingly trying to trick me. And I had been working to get him some better role models. How bad was it at Malfoy Manor that Lucius was giving me a literal blank check to babysit his son for the summer? Or was he just playing a long game to get me more fully used to taking Malfoy money? I was more comfortable keeping an eye out for a knife in my back than puppet strings being tied to my wrists. But I probably just had to make sure I didn't get too comfortable becoming part of Draco's entourage, right? "I'll talk to the rest of the crew," I told him, "but I think it will probably be okay. I'll let you know." He smiled, genuinely, and headed out after Theodore. I found Percy waiting for me up the hall, having had my back after all. "What was that about?" he asked. Wanted to say he didn't support his dad trying to kill me and apologize for not warning me sooner. "Drake, how do you feel about taking him along if we take a trip this summer? He'd apparently rather hang out with us than his new aunt." "Interesting," Percy mused as we walked. "Actually, I had been meaning to mention. My parents have been trying to arrange the funds to visit my eldest brother this summer, and it might be quite the educational field trip for all of us to visit Egypt." "Downtime, what classes did you finally decide on, Hermione?" I asked the young witch, as McGonagall did a final whip round of the breakfast table to confirm the rising third year's electives. The banners around the room were still in Gryffindor colors after the previous night's feast, and we were all trying to hurriedly top up on protein and carbs before the long train ride home. "You convinced me," she sighed. "I'm just taking 3 classes." I looked deeper into the available research on temporal theory, and while the general consensus is that time is self-consistent, there's still a lot of scholarship about the risk of paradox, and I don't know if I want to worry about that, so she finally took a breath. Runes, arithmancy, and muggle studies. She took in my raised eyebrow at the last class, which she could probably teach, and explained, "I can take it with my roommates, and Professor McGonagall said I can do an extra credit project to outline possible improvements to the curriculum. Plus, Hagrid said he'd be happy to help me self-study care of magical creatures, and I met Professor Trelawney, and I think you're right about how much I'd learn from her versus just taking the material independently." I nodded. I hadn't had much interaction with the flaky divination professor myself since my placement exams, but my impression was that serious, task-oriented Hermione Granger might be in danger of eventually stabbing the poor woman, especially sleep-deprived from squeezing extra hours into every day with a time machine. Hopefully, she wouldn't be similarly upset once she actually found out how confused Professor Burbage was about the Muggle world. A lot of things might have been different if Quirrell had just stuck around in the position rather than going off to get possessed by Voldemort. Though, now that I thought about it, maybe the tidbits about the Muggle world Quirrell had dropped in his defense classes were more a sign about how much Voldemort knew. I had missed my chance to find out if Voldemort Prime had ever updated his musical tastes from the Beatles. But Tom Riddle had actually grown up Muggle, a lot like I had, honestly. Dumbledore had eventually mentioned to me that Tom had been left at an orphanage after the death of his magical parent, through whom he, presumably, descended from old Sal. I like to think that I was much better adjusted than Tom Riddle, despite my years in the system. "What about you, mate?" Ron asked. "Are you going to be the professor's assistant for defense?" I nodded. Professor Lupin basically insisted, though more for weekend and evening tutoring than sitting in on classes. I still have a full class load myself. After both of us realized, I'd basically figured out Lockhart's curriculum for the year for him. Even though he'd then memory charmed it out of my brain, it seemed natural that I'd help Remus write his own lesson plan over the summer and let helping out be most of my newt grade. I was pretty sure I'd also get called on to substitute teach for the lower years on the days he was recovering from the full moon. "Students, you now have 1 hour until you need to be packed and getting on the coaches down to Hogsmeade," McGonagall announced, kicking off a frantic scrambling of Gryffindors that hadn't even started to pack yet. The other houses seemed a little more sedate about it. As the table cleared, I couldn't help but get a good look across the way at Maeve, effortlessly moving from group to group, getting final yearbook signatures and chatting away as if they were her best friends. She'd clearly already got her hooks into a bunch of Hufflepuff, as she'd intimated earlier in the year, and some of the middle-year Ravenclaws that were furthest away from Penny and Luna's influence on either end. It worried me. "We'll stop her," Mathilda told me, somehow. I smiled. The forces arrayed against me were powerful and incomprehensible, but I had people in my corner, too. I wrapped my arm around my witch's shoulder and asked, "What did I do to deserve you?" "Well," she pretended to think, "saving the school from a giant snake, driving off an undead Dark Lord, multiple times. But if that isn't enough, you can pay down that imposter syndrome by helping me carry my trunk down to the coaches." "Deal," I smiled, and we went about the business of navigating the chaos of end of year in Gryffindor Tower. An hour later we were rattling down the drive to Hogsmeade, sharing a Thistral-drawn carriage with Oliver and Alexis, who were still together after the year and who, Oliver had smugly told me after spring break, would also have to pass on any future trips to visit the unicorns. "So is there a final summer plan?" Oliver asked. "Still a little up in the air," I shrugged. "Sounds like money's still a little tight for the Weasleys, so they're not sure how long of a trip they can take." "Internships and camps," Mathilda explained. "Charlie Weasley is probably going to be there, yeah. He can supervise my internship for credit. My uncle can sign off on it as long as we go to some of the local creature preserves. Lots of cool magical beasts in Egypt." "I wish my family was that deep in the ministry," Alexis pouted. "I don't have to work, at least, and I can go as long as I get my summer homework done and apprenticeship applications out before we leave. I'm just doing 2 weeks of the camp this year, Oliver allowed. Though hopefully most of the team probably go and we can get some practice in Oven, Egypt. I was sure that would go over great with the rest of them. Cool. Hopefully everyone else is equally flexible, I simply agreed. I was thinking about working for Ms. Dervish again, but 2 months really isn't very much summer break if there's a vacation in the middle. At least it would give Remus time to move fully into his professor's accommodations at the school. I really appreciated that he was still putting me up for probably half the summer. But maybe I should start figuring out what I'd do for the next winter holiday, or for when I had to find my own living arrangements after I graduated. Also, when it came down to it, I was now probably even higher on a Lick's hit list than Albus Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard of the age. And I was somehow deeply wrapped up in an inscrutable elfin plot that had placed a she-queen to serve as my school's very own mean girl. And I still had a one-strike-and-you're-out legal ruling due to a hard-headed aura that may never be rescinded since I'd burned my bridges with the senior undersecretary of the ministry. But all of that would keep. For the first time in my life, I seemed to have it all: a support network of friends, a girlfriend, adults I could count on, and enough money in my pocket that I didn't have to worry about the next meal. For one short summer, I had all the privileges of an adult and all the freedoms of a teenager. I could fret later, but I decided to count my blessings now. The perils of the world would still be there after I took my last summer vacation as a student. End of Year 2. Chapter 28, Dark Room 14, Guerrilla Warfare. Chapter Text Appendix 1. The apologies. This is the write-up I turned into Dumbledore at the end of the year to show how our spell research was going. There are 4 known dark magic spells that are based upon the principles of Hellfire. 3 are known as the Unforgivables and carry a guaranteed prison sentence if proven to be used. The last, FiendFyre, would probably be in the same group, but few can even cast it, and even those dark wizards that can do so fear to use it due to how hard it is to control. That seems to be why it was never similarly made instantly illegal. Choosing to cast it is usually its own death sentence. All 4 spells resonate on an unusual frequency that makes most magical defenses useless. The only safe response is getting out of the way or allowing it to expend its energy on another target. The FiendFyre curse is a corruption of the fire-making charm and requires fear to catalyze. It essentially summons up an imago of pure hellfire, a terrifying animal mascot of insatiable, impossibly hot flames. It will generally burn until it has consumed all possible fuel in reach, especially if the caster manages to survive unleashing the curse to provide continuing magic to power the imago. It's said to be hotter than dragon's fire and can destroy virtually anything, unweaving immense protective magics as easily as it cuts through dense timber. It takes a strong caster to guide it, and an even stronger one to put it out early. Unlike the true Unforgivables, simply casting the spell doesn't seem to damage the caster's soul, though deaths as a result will, and it's very easy to kill many people if it gets out of control. This likely has something to do with it being the simplest expression of hellfire of any of the 4 curses. The dominating curse, the Imperious, requires the caster to feel spite toward the target. It essentially copies the mythological powers of the succubi, wrapping the soul of the target in the most innocent-seeming of hellish flames. It's often like being in a refreshing sauna, surrounded by embracing heat and light. The emotional decision-making parts of your mind can't come up with cogent arguments for not following the directions of the caster. Sadly, the more mechanical parts of the brain aren't incapacitated, so victims can pursue their orders with their full skill and intelligence. For those that are strong-willed or simply disagreeable, it can be broken, with less effort the weaker the caster. The biddable, however, can be subsumed for extended periods without it even being obvious to onlookers. Fortunately, only one victim at a time can be maintained by any caster. Not even Voldemort can manage an army of mind control victims without an equal number of cooperators to cast the curse. Imperious chains are possible, however, where one victim casts the curse upon another. But it is difficult to find someone weak-willed enough to succumb but also a strong enough caster to control another target. Regardless, the strength reduces with each step in the chain until it is easy to break. The torture curse, the Cruciatus, requires an extremely potent anger at the target, even true rage. It essentially bathes the target's very soul in hellish flames, interpreted by the mind as impassable pain throughout the body that never abates. Prolonged exposure can damage the interface between the target's mind and soul, usually expressed as symptoms that seem a lot like having a stroke, even though no damage is evident in the brain itself. The fortunate may just lose some level of motor control, temporarily or permanently. The unfortunate might be driven into catatonia. The killing curse requires actual hatred to cast, ideally for the target, but research suggests that self-hatred might allow one to cast the spell, or perhaps that just slips effortlessly into misanthropy. Where the torture curse burns the soul slowly and painfully, the killing curse is like a knife of hellish plasma, instantly cutting away all ties between the soul and the body. It is in some ways an instant and peaceful way to go, because of how fast and cleanly it strikes. No one has ever provably survived being struck by it, though there are apocryphal tales of those who might be described as having robust souls not quite dying instantly. The little understood energy soulfire is a celestial counterpart to hellfire. While it presents, conceptually, as silver flames, they are more like a protective, empowering corona than a damaging force. Legends explain that spells directly empowered by the energy are more real than their counterparts, lasting longer and having greater strength and durability. Spells that utilize it seem to be as indifferent to magical protections as the unforgivables, passing right through magical shields. Currently, there are only 2 known spells that utilize this energy, though 2 more are in development. The Patronus charm is the counterpart to FiendFyre and shares many similarities to light-making spells. It requires a feeling of safe happiness to catalyze, in its fullest expression generating a protector imago in the form of an animal. The summoned beast, or mist shield for lesser castings, radiates a mood-enhancing aura that naturally drives off creatures of darkness. Fully cast, corporeal, Patronus imagos can sometimes seem to have an almost physical effect on dark magic creatures. The empowering charm, the Libertas, requires a sense of pride in the target, forging a conduit for the caster to augment the recipient's willpower. This can dispel its counterpart, the Imperious. It is possible, however, that a weak Libertas caster, a weak-willed target, and a strong dark wizard may prevent the curse from breaking, research pending. It also seems to strengthen the recipient's mind enough to throw off other forms of mental manipulation, like the Confundus. It does not, sadly, seem to remove memory charms in most cases. The exorcism charm, incantation-related title-pending arithmancy work, should work similarly to the torture curse, but using soulfire instead of hellfire. This should have only a positive effect on those with undamaged souls, but slip into the cracks of souls damaged by dark magic and cause them psychic pain, likely through a barrage of forgotten emotions like guilt and shame. The expectation is that it should work to separate dark spirits that have attached themselves to objects or innocent beings, ending wraithly possession and similar effects where one soul or soul-like entity is latched onto another. It is currently under active development, and its catalyst emotion and incantation are not yet known. The sulfur charm should be a counterpart of the killing curse, directing a focused blast of soulfire at the soul of the target. The primary hope is that it should serve as a way of dispatching dark entities that are immune to all mortal means of harm, such as dementors and wraiths. Any other effects are unknown at this time, as is the incantation and emotion, since all information is purely theoretical. Development is planned after the completion of the exorcism charm. Appendix 2, Guerrilla Warfare Dictaquill recording, is proceeding overseen by Aura apprentice Nymphadora Tonks. Aura Alistair Moody interviewing underaged witness Mathilda Grimblehawk. Minerva McGarnigal is here in loco parentis for this interview. Ms. Grimblehawk, please describe the events of this afternoon in Hogwarts in your own words and to the best of your recollection. So, I had gotten back early from lunch. I was studying in the Gryffindor common room with the second years. We'd all stayed back at school for the break. I have owls coming up. I'm not sure why they did. Hermione Granger, top of her year, our house, always thinks she's going to have a hard time, so she studies very hard. This time, she's got her friends doing it. That girl's going to be the first Muggle-born minister. Anyway, last year, study sessions with the lower years seemed to help the fifth years. You get to review that year for owls, and the year gets to review for their exams. I think Penny, Clearwater, Ravenclaw prefect, she's so nice, came up with the idea. But I did it last year because of Harry Dresden. You know Harry, right? Of course you do. You interviewed him after the Death Eater attack at Hogsmeade last year. Oh, and you've probably been tutoring his year in defense, too, Aura Moody. Well, last year he was just my friend, and at the attack we just kind of got together. But now he's basically my boyfriend. I think he's even about ready to admit it to himself. Tonks, we don't high-five witnesses during an interview. Sorry, but we were in the common room. I think we were reviewing astronomy. Harry's awful at astronomy. He barely passed his owls on that. I've been mostly reviewing stuff he can't help me with this week. I've got defense in the bag, I think, though I still haven't managed a patronus for the extra credit. I'm rambling, sorry. We had just got to studying even though everyone else was still at lunch. Then left and Wright burst in like Filch was after them. I mean the Weasley twins, Fred and George. You've met them. You get it. For the record, though, please, Ms. Grimblehawk. Okay, well, they're twins. They have a lot of fun. Get in trouble a lot. They like it when you can't tell them apart. Even when they were first years, and I tried tagging them to tell them apart, they got even. Those boys can prank. So I just think of them based on what side they're standing on. Easier than stealth tickling charms at all hours as payback for writing their names on their foreheads. I figured they'd just set off a prank in the Great Hall or something, but they had on their serious faces. You learn to tell when they're actually serious and not just setting you up. Lockhart's gone crazy, Left said. And then Wright said, he's after Harry and McGonagall. You know, I'm just paraphrasing Wright. My memory's not good enough to tell you exactly what they said. Yes, we'll consider quotations as to the best of your recollection, Ms. Grimblehawk. Please continue. Right. So Harry wasn't even supposed to be here today. He went home for the holidays. Well, to the home he's staying at. He doesn't really have a permanent address, on account of his parents being dead and his mentor trying to kill him last year. He's had it rough. Anyway, he was supposed to be at the ministry today. He was a witness for the Wisengamot for a new law. I know, I'm off track. Sorry, Left and Right might trick you for a prank, so I was wary. But you can usually rely on them when it's dangerous. So trust but verify. What? Harry's here? I probably asked them. He said the Wisengamot was going to evacuate the school, Left said. Right added, but that it was a trick from the Death Eaters, so he went to warn McGonagall. Sorry, Professor, but they just said McGonagall. We mostly don't say Professor so-and-so, unless we have to. I'm so glad you're okay. Right, sorry. Then Lockhart attacked us all, Left added, and Right finished, so they sent us to get help. One day, I'm going to split them up. Then I'm going to see if whichever one I've got can say 2 sentences in a row. I bet he'll just sit there after the first sentence, wondering why the next one isn't being completed. I bet you have to line their homework up side by side to read it. Sorry. We'd barely gotten all that out when we heard an explosion outside by the stairs. I ran to the portrait door to look out, and someone, probably Ron Weasley, yelled. He might have the basilisk, which was dumb. There are lots of windows into the stairwell, and it was lunchtime. I'm not sure the basilisk can be around in the day at all, but it certainly wouldn't be out in the sunlight. They're kind of like vampires. Creatures powered by dark magic don't like sunlight. So I ignored them and poked my head out. And I saw Belby, the potions professor, attacking Harry and Professor McGonagall with her rampant potions. I don't think either of you saw me. Right. So the two of them ran off, but I knew it was now 2 bad professors. Professor Belby's attacking them too. I told everybody. I used his title because we also have a student who's a Belby right now, and it might have been confusing. We discussed it quickly. I can't remember who said what, but we decided that we were in a tight spot. Most of the professors went on vacation. If McGonagall was in trouble and Lockhart and Belby were bad guys, we had a problem. Flitwick was gone for the holiday. Dumbledore hadn't been around all week, and Harry told me. I mean, the rumor was he got petrified, or half petrified, or whatever. We weren't sure if anyone else was good in a fight. So while it was clear, we sent the kids to find Hagrid. People underestimate Hagrid. He's a hell of a shot, and not much can hurt him. If he needed to, he could probably take out anyone on staff short of Dumbledore and maybe Professor McGonagall or Flitwick. Why are they after us? I asked, at some point. The twins pointed out that Harry thought Lockhart was controlled by some magic item he was wearing, and maybe Belby was Imperiused. We had a discussion about how none of us can cast the Liberatus. Harry tried to show me, but since I haven't even cast the Patronus yet. One of the twins eventually said, Belby is coming this way, and Nart's first name is Cantankerous. Is it slander or libel, I guess, if I accuse a Wisengamot member of something that I can't prove in a witness statement? Just list your suppositions. This isn't a trial. Okay. Cantankerous Nart is a pureblood that was accused of being a Death Eater, but didn't go to Azkaban after the war. Harry's been attacked at least twice by a Death Eater with his same general build. I was there for one of them. Also, he seemed very interested in staring at Harry at the Malfoy New Year's party. I had the most awesome dress robes, and Harry cleaned up very nicely. He can dance. Why don't we ever have dances at school? The Muggles do it all the sorry. So I was on guard. The twins have some way of knowing who's on campus and more or less where they are. I don't want to make any further suppositions about how that could be in the present company. Fine. Anyway. Belby was after us, and we knew he'd been attacking Professor McGonagall and Harry, so was either bad or Imperiused or whatever. And maybe Nart was just here because of the Wisengamot decision to evacuate the school, but maybe not. So we figured we shouldn't just stay put in the tower. Get what you can before he gets here. I told the twins. They ran back to their room quickly and came back with bulging pockets. I told you they did pranks. Everyone else in Gryffindor was at lunch, so we decided to head out too. Didn't want to get trapped. We weren't sure if Professor Belby could get into the tower. Because of being a professor, we got out and were going to try to go warn everyone at lunch. But then the twins said that Lockhart was in the Great Hall, and everyone else seemed to be going back to their common rooms. So we guessed he had just told everyone to do it, rather than killing everyone. And probably because it would be easier to find the twins before they could tell on him. And Belby was heading back upstairs with everyone, so we couldn't just warn them. So we went to find the other professors. They maybe couldn't win a duel against the bad professors, but you know, adults. Long story short, having the twins along made it hard to convince people. Everyone thought it was a prank. They really have a bad reputation. We mostly spent a few hours staying just ahead of Belby and Nart, and wondering why the kids hadn't come back with Hagrid. But the later it got, the more we worried that they would let the basilisk out. And we still couldn't find Harry or Professor McGonagall or Lockhart on the map. Did I say map? I meant like a metaphorical map. A map is not the territory, I know. Maps. Who was talking about maps? And like, I can't prove that Nart is the same guy as the Death Eater that was stalking around the hallways or anything, because he eventually got away. But when we went looking for Nart, we found a guy in a Death Eater robe and mask. It's all I'm saying. You know, I don't think the bad guys were prepared for kids who actually knew how to get around the school. If you knew the secret passages and had a good idea of where people were, a small resistance could probably hold the school for months against invaders. You know, like those big apes in the jungle. Do you mean gorillas? Right, gorillas. They're like big Muggle demiguises. Can they turn invisible too? Or like the Muggle camouflage equivalent? That would explain why guerrilla warfare means using hit-and-run tactics. That must be terrifying. They can get up to more than 30 stone and are strong enough to rip your arm right out of the socket. That's not, never mind. Continue, please. You are using guerrilla tactics. Yes. The Muggle kids have been telling us about Scooby-Doo. It's a telly show about 4 kids and their talking dog that solve mysteries. Usually it's a monster terrorizing a place, and it's almost always actually just another Muggle pretending to be a monster to scare people away to do crimes. Harry likes comparing Hermione to one of the characters, Velvet maybe. I'm going to try to see some of it. It sounds interesting. But most of the episodes apparently have a whole scene where funny music is playing, and the monsters chasing the kids and doors are opening and closing. See, Tonks gets it. If it's relevant, Auror Apprentice Tonks will append this record with a more concise description. But I take it you were using hit-and-run tactics and using your superior numbers to keep the Death Eater from staying in pursuit of a single target. Exactly. And I don't think he really understood that he was dealing with twins. Because they kept letting him chase one of them around a corner, and then the other one would pop out and be like, "No, I'm over here." And he kept falling for it. But he was firing off unforgivables, so we had to be fast. and it was pretty terrifying, especially when Professor Belby showed up and started throwing dangerous potions. But I felt like his heart wasn't really in it. I'm pretty sure the twins are secretly his favorites of their year. They're really good in potions class. They've been a super big help to brush up on my potions from last year for owls. We kept it up for a long time. None of the three of us are great at the dangerous spells that you use in a duel when it's serious. But the Death Eater really was. And even though he may have been trying to resist the Imperius, Belby was good at shielding against what we could throw. I'm glad I'm not trying to be an aura. So much respect for you two, having to fight wizards like that. But if we're right, he's a really old man. The Death Eater, I mean, who was getting tired. Belby's not that old, but he eventually used up all his potions, and the twins were running out of Zonko products and their own tricks, so we weren't sure which way it would go. Then Harry showed up. He'll probably say he didn't do much, that we handled it. He's really modest, and has no idea how scary he is to the bad guys. We were fighting through the trophy room on the 3rd floor, and the bad guys had us kind of pinned down. Then we hear Libero from near the stairwell. That's the incantation for the Liberatus charm, the one that frees people from the Imperius that I mentioned. Yes, we're up to speed on that. In fact, I think we'll make that a priority for as many of you as possible to learn in my last tutoring sessions this year. It would be good for everyone to know. So Dresden cast it on Belby. Right. And we poked our heads out, and there was Professor Belby looking all confused about how he got there. And Harry. He was wearing his nice robes, which really aren't that nice. I need to see about fixing that, probably because he'd been at the Weisengamot and hadn't changed. And they were scuffed up, but just enough to make him look like he'd been in a battle. So sexy. And he had his unicorn horn focus in one hand and a silver broadsword in the other. I found out later it was the sword of Gryffindor, and he was wearing the sorting hat. He looked like Godric Gryffindor come back to life. There's a sketch of him in Hogwarts, a history. I mean Godric Gryffindor, not Harry. I kind of wish Colin Creevy, first-year Gryffindor photographer, had been here. Professor McGonagall, do you think it's okay if Harry holds onto the hat and the sword? Just until Colin gets back, please. Yay. Well, the Death Eater takes one look at Harry, realizes Belby's not on his side anymore, and just turns and runs. Belby chases him out of the school, and Harry looked like he was going to help, but then he checked on us. And then he said we needed to make sure Professor McGonagall was okay, even though he looked like he was so exhausted he was about to fall over. Gryffindor men, right. Tonks. No regular fives, either. So then we went up to the room of requirement and dug Professor McGonagall out of the pile of junk she got knocked under by Lockhart. I'm sure she and Harry already told you about that. Great. Do you need anything else from me? Because I have a lot of studying to do, and I think I missed dinner, and Harry might not have changed clothes yet. Fine. This concludes the interview. Chapter 29. Hex Khan 1. Symbol-minded. Chapter text: Drums in the deep. The mausoleum was on fire, and it wasn't my fault. It was Draco's fault. Why didn't that work? The basically white-haired teen screamed. Usual affected nonchalance, impossible to muster at the moment. It was hard to be cool when the horde of mutant skeletons was now a horde of burning mutant skeletons, and that wasn't slowing them down any. It had been a pretty nice fire-making charm that the rich kid had freaked out and cast when the remains of the tomb robbers started to animate. It was Percy's fault. I think they must be surrounded by a dark magic aura that preserved their bones but not their flesh, and that keeps them from burning, my roommate observed. The lean, bespectacled redhead was trying to maintain his dignity while fast walking out of the tomb, away from the undead creatures. They'd been totally inert until he tried to show off his ability to read Demotic to his girlfriend and wound up animating the tomb protectors. It was Penny's fault. There has to be something else involved, though otherwise the flames would just go out. Maybe they used an early variant of Plankart's inversion to cause a fast-acting mutating cancer, and it's still somehow putting enough energy into the bodies to fuel the fire. Curly blonde-haired girl, for whom Percy had been showing off, was clearly still in researcher mode. She'd been trying to figure out why the skeletonized bodies of the cursed tomb robbers lying about had extra heads and arms. She was hurrying to keep up with the group, but it didn't seem to have sunk in yet that a horde of flaming skeletons were shambling after us. and she was the one that had talked us into slipping into the not-quite-cleared mausoleum for a little investigation. But it wasn't my fault. My name is Harry Dresden, 17-year-old legal adult wizard, basilisk slayer, Voldemort's #1 annoyance, and part-time felon, and I wasn't even supposed to be there. My other roommate and my girlfriend were off checking out a Sudanese magical beast preserve, but I got talked into exploring the secret wizarding tombs near Abu Simbel, regardless. Guys, run now, research later. I urged them, not happy about how the skeletons seemed to be picking up speed, but we really weren't. The tomb complex was fairly vast, the work of Ptolemy-era Egyptian wizards who'd hidden their city far from the more famous Muggle areas. Nobody was quite sure why the Egyptian government decided to move the older Abu Simbel temple nearby when they flooded the original site to make a giant like a few decades earlier. Maybe it was conspiracy, or maybe it was just good bedrock to support that kind of thing. According to Percy's brother, Bill, the local magicals had forgotten about the tombs themselves and had a hell of a time scrambling to keep the Muggles from finding the site back in the 60s. Given that some of them had sported the remnants of modern clothing, the skeletons chasing us had probably been a mix of tomb robbers from the original era and the last few decades. Everybody thought they were Indiana Jones, but most of them were Satipo. You know, Alfred Molina's character. Dies in the beginning of Raiders. I had that movie on the brain since I'd insisted all my friends watch it before we went on vacation to Egypt, which was why it was especially galling that we triggered a trap our first outing on our own. Reading my annoyance as we finally started running, Percy insisted. The traps should have all been deactivated. Bill insisted it was safe. To be fair, babe, Penny said, still not properly appreciating the tight spot we were in, you shouldn't have read passages from the Book of Going Forth by Night in front of the corpses. Why were there even still corpses? Draco tried to run and have a nervous breakdown at the same time. Given that he was the only one of us that played sports, he'd probably have already been to safety if he had his breathing under control. He hadn't been aware that the tops in the corner of the tomb were covering where they'd relocated the bodies, since they hadn't gotten around to properly disposing of them yet. The fortunate thing about being chased by a bunch of burning skeletons is that they provide plenty of light to see by, and we were easily able to keep our footing as we finally got to the slightly collapsed entrance of this particular tomb. I brought up the rear as we stepped over fallen masonry and ducked out of the shored-up tunnel that led into the tomb. Engorgio, Penny incanted as soon as I was clear, causing a head-sized chunk of fallen stone to swell to block the entire passageway. See, no need to panic. I was actually surprised that my year mates hadn't panicked. Percy and Penny hadn't really been in any of the combat situations I seemed to find myself in around Hogwarts, where we all went to school. Despite being more than willing to help out, they tended to miss the chaos. While they were both gifted casters, I still didn't have proof they'd be an asset in a real fight. Maybe this showed they would, or maybe they just hadn't realized how serious the situation could have gotten. A loud, bony thud resounded from the other side of the impromptu barrier, and a bit of flame shot around the edges. Everyone was suddenly very still, waiting to see if Penny would immediately be proven wrong. But the boulder held, and the sounds diminished from the other side. Lumos, Percy cast, lighting up his wand so he could see in the low corridor that ran under the sands from tomb to tomb. It still bugged me that my wand-reliant friends could either cast spells or have a flashlight. I needed to get them better foci for the light charm, or actual flashlights. As I was saying, Bill was sure it was safe. Those bodies were primed to reanimate, but only as part of an enchantment placed on the sarcophagus itself, which the curse breakers removed. Congratulations, Draco sneered, sitting on the floor with his legs pulled against his chest, trying not to hyperventilate. You found an ancient curse even Gringotts curse breakers missed. Better write to McGonagall to have that count towards being head boy. Being sarcastic seemed to make the kid feel better in almost any circumstance. I already passed on that, Percy shrugged. Wait, what? I asked him. Being the school's head boy, as hilarious as I thought the title sounded, had been one of Percy's dreams. They gave head girl to Gemma Farley instead of Penny, he explained. Which I have no doubt she earned, he nodded to Draco. Gemma Farley was the Slytherin girls' prefect in our year and presumably a friend of Draco's, since that was his house. But I realized that it would be a lot of responsibility and time, not even spent with Penny. I have too much study for Newts to do and our research project. The position is helpful for the general ministry bureaucracy, but not for the Department of Mysteries. That's really smart, man, I told him. He'd come a long way from the status-obsessed kid I'd first met 2 years earlier. Who'd they pick instead? Flinton, I think, he answered. The Hufflepuff boys' prefect seemed like a good choice. Penny had clearly already known about this, but squeezed Percy's shoulder anyway for making such a mature decision. She said, though, that digression aside, I guess a recitation shouldn't have had that much effect if it wasn't keyed into the tomb wards. Now that I think about it, a password-activated animation effect would have been really hard to miss. So why did they suddenly stand up and attack us? They may have only attacked us because someone set them on fire. I glared at Draco. Obviously, it was slightly hypocritical because I might have blasted them by reflex myself if I'd been a few seconds faster than Draco. But this time it wasn't my fault, and I was going to hang on to that fact. As for why they animated, I wonder if it was coincidental. I trailed off, realizing that my subconscious had been trying to raise a flag about something I'd half noticed for a few minutes now. Does anyone else hear drumming? I stopped talking, and everyone shut up. My hearing is generally uncannily good, but once I pointed it out, I could see that the others began to realize that the only sound in the underground necropolis other than our breathing was far too rhythmic to be the natural sounds of wind and earth. I did a quick bit of math and realized that it was probably a little after sunset outside. We'd been too engrossed to clear out when the rest of the Gringotts teams and their guests started leaving for dinner, and this close to the equator sunset was only around 6:30 even at the end of July. Have they ever spent the night in these tombs before? I asked. Everyone else gave a big shrug. Maybe we should go ahead and leave. Even with magic, the ancient wizarding Egyptians hadn't believed in wasting any more effort digging underground passages than their Muggle contemporaries. The corridor was low enough I had to duck under the recently installed wooden support beams as we walked, and Percy ducked his own head just so his untamable carrot top wouldn't brush against them. While he wasn't anywhere near my freakish height, Percy had gotten the last of his growth spurts around the time he turned 17, and most of the Weasley boys were tall. Draco had only just turned 13 a couple of months earlier, so might have to worry about being too tall someday, but not yet. And he already had Penny beaten for height, so she was pulling ahead of the group, completely unconcerned due to having over a foot of clearance over her petite frame. Sometimes being small was an advantage. Not having to duck every few feet meant she had time to get her thoughts in order, so asked, if this is drumming, and it's related, that's American necromantic traditions, right? Percy answered, yes, though possibly by way of Africa. Syncretism between various native traditions that grew to prominence around the Caribbean. I believe it is supposed to require less effort and time than the British style. An Inferius is essentially a dark magic item, with all the enchanting work that entails. Drumming necromancy requires significantly less preparation, but relies on the drumbeat to represent the beating of the heart. Stop the drummer, stop the undead. Or at least, remove the necromancer's control, which often ends the animation. Good to know, I told them, grimacing, because I think we're heading toward it. The passage finally emptied into a much larger room, which served as entryway and embalming chamber for the various connected crypts. It was the only way out of the complex, up to the Gringotts encampment, where we were spending most of our vacation. Beautiful frescoes covered the walls, and had held up better than their Muggle equivalents due to preservative magic. The excavation teams had placed cool-burning bluebell flames in glass jars throughout the room, providing plenty of light, albeit with a bluish tinge. And sure enough, standing in the middle of the room, atop a stone bier used for embalming, between us and the doorway, was the drummer. A slender, androgynous figure that I assumed was female from the knockoff Cleopatra robes, and headdress alternated using a hand, and the end of a black, lacquered wand to strike the head of a simple wood and skin drum slung across her chest with a leather strap. If she weren't the drummer, I would have assumed she was one of the things it was animating, because her skin was a near-translucent, pallid grey, and her eyes were milky with cataracts. She saw us as soon as we exited the corridor, and her deathly blue lips turned up in a smirk, humor that didn't reach those dead eyes. "Early party guests," she said, voice cultured but extremely gritty like a heavy smoker, and glimpses of yellow teeth didn't belie that impression. "Don't worry, the others should be along shortly. Then we'll all go out and make more friends on the surface. Oh, but where are my manners, new friends? Pleased to meet you. You can call me Mavra." "Black and white. I think she's a vampire," Penny whispered, wand at the ready. "She is, and her hearing is very good," Mavra chuckled, in a voice that was as dry and dusty as the tomb we were in. She still perched a yard above the stone floor, standing on a stone bier that had been used to embalm the denizens of the mausoleum complex. "Black Court," Draco added, surprisingly. He hadn't even done his third-year defense work, which was mostly about creatures, but maybe he'd been reading ahead. The vampire didn't deny it, and I racked my brain for what I knew from my own owl studies. The Hogwarts curriculum didn't go that deeply into vampires beyond pointing out that there was a different type, native to the Americas, that functioned differently than those more common to Europe. The locals were pretty similar to the ones in Dracula, while the American ones were more like demon bats in human suits. Magical creatures are weird. They were supposed to be hideously powerful, especially as they got older, though they had the classic weaknesses to sunlight, garlic, holy symbols, and the like. But they were technically classed and legally protected as beings. If they were willing to follow the laws of wizards when interacting with them, the Ministry and the International Confederation of Wizards didn't really care if they were devouring muggles by the busload. Which meant we weren't supposed to light them on fire preemptively, even if they were being super creepy. Percy had apparently come to the same conclusion and tried to be diplomatic. "We appreciate the offer of friendship, madam, but I think we will soon be missed by our fellows and would prefer to go ahead and demonstrate that we are all okay." "So polite," Mavra told him, still drumming. "For that, you, your lover, and the Malvora cast-off can go." Dresden, however, has an engraved invitation that it wouldn't be polite to decline. I groaned and said, "Let me guess, that invitation came with a snake and skull on it." I'd known there were rumors that Voldemort had made allies among the dark creatures throughout Europe. Maybe I'd gotten complacent that he'd just be sending Death Eaters after me. Mavra just nodded, still drumming calmly. She cocked an ear expectantly, and I also soon picked up sounds of desiccated feet shuffling up the several corridors that emptied into this room. The other bodies in the complex must have had to dig themselves out rather than being laid out under a top. "You deny me my protector?" Draco asked, curiously. He bargained. The House of Malfoy has a use for Harry Dresden still, and would be willing to negotiate an end to hostilities. While I wasn't really pleased that he was treating me like a business interest, I hoped that Draco was just trying to stick up for me. Mavra just shook her head, however, and explained, "I care little for the concerns of the White Court in the best of times, and even less for the machinations of their cadet branches. But again, your politeness does you credit. Best take my offer to leave while you can. The party is about to begin." Hopefully I'd have time to work out what she meant about a White Court later. "I knew being in that picture was a bad idea," I muttered. The Weasley family had won a ministry prize draw that was funding their extended Egyptian vacation, and it was apparently newsworthy. I mostly suspected that the Malfoys had engineered it to make sure Draco had a good vacation without his hosts feeling like they were taking charity from a man they hated. Regardless, the 9-person family and several of their close friends who were also on this trip crowded into a spread for the cover of the Daily Prophet. It must have been a slow news day. Maybe I should have argued harder about not being in the photo. I was paying for my own trip with book money, which I already felt guilty enough about taking since I just cleaned up Severus Snape's potions notes from an old book I'd found that had belonged to the dead potions prodigy. This just be the first of bad guys who would figure out where I was and make a play for whatever bounty the Death Eaters had set on my head. "You guys get out," I told them. Hopefully and get help was implicit. "No," Percy said simply. "I have failed to have your back too many times already." Damn, why did my friend have to prove right now that he wasn't just in Gryffindor as a legacy? Penny had looked torn about leaving me, but she definitely wasn't going to leave me and her boyfriend. Professor Lupin better give me extra credit for this, she whispered to console herself, moving further into a dueling stance. Draco looked at both of them like they were mad, gave me a seriously apologetic shrug, and said, "Well, good luck to the three of you. Madame Mavra." She smirked that evil smirk and gestured, so Draco strode quickly past her and toward the exit. He did keep his head turned, so he could watch her out of his peripheral vision. Maybe he just hoped for her to try to hex him in the back, because that would give us a chance to attack her. That would be the most charitable assumption. But the kid got safely into the stairway that led up to the surface, and we were running out of time to wait. I could clearly hear the shuffling almost to us from the other corridors, though we'd at least delayed the attack from the one we'd come from. I vaguely worried that I didn't have my staff, mostly because it was held to maneuver in the low-ceilinged corridors, but I drew my blasting rod and shook my shield bracelet out from under my sleeve. Percy moved to my right and drew his wand, with Penny slightly back and more protected between us. "Last chance to call this off, ma'am," I suggested, playing toward her enjoyment of politeness for all the good it would do me. "No, I think not," she said, and then stepped back off the embalming bier, placing its solid stone basalt bulk in between her and us, dropping prone so we could only locate her by the drumming. Mummies began to stagger from the corridor opposite us, quickly orienting on the only living beings in the room. "Reducto!" I shouted, hoping that the Gringotts teams would accept a horde of mummies as a good reason to damage the architecture. Sadly, my spell barely affected the lintel of the hallway that was spewing undead, resisted by ancient protections in the stone. A few chips of limestone shattered free, but did little more than annoy the undead. Aguamenti, Percy tried moments before Penny's, glacius. Sadly, the attempt to combo summoning and then freezing water was thwarted by the dry air. The water-making spell needed water vapor in the air to catalyze its conjuration, in concordance with Gamp's laws, and so all Percy got was a super soaker rather than a fire hose. The lead mummy was encased in a thin layer of ice that it quickly began to escape from, and the few behind just started to go around. "They're not all going to be fireproof," I suggested, still hanging on to FiendFyre as my last-ditch wizard's curse. I wasn't keen to use it, since it would likely kill me and my friends as well, but if all hope was lost anyway. But for the time being, I tried, Confringo, and launched my girlfriend's uncle's favorite spell at one of the approaching mummies. The torrent of explosive fire had the intended effect, causing the animated dead man to catch fire and explode, shattering the ice off of his neighbor and staggering all the nearby mummies. Fortunately, Percy was watching our flank because I heard him yell, "Protego," at the same time as Mavra non-verbally launched some kind of curse from the cover of the stone bier. Percy's hasty shield barely knocked it out of the air, but wavered as if it had packed a hell of a punch. The vampire had switched to entirely drumming with her left hand, while she was using her ebon wand as a focus instead of a drumstick. "Switch," Percy suggested. I went low as Percy and Penny started hurling fire-making charms at the remaining mummies, getting my own shield up to intercept a couple more unspecified curses. They hit hard, but my shield was holding. I didn't recognize them exactly from her wand gestures and the colors, but they reminded me of some of the darker spells that the auras had warned us about in our tutoring sessions. Yet, somehow, more raw, as if Mavra had studied their precursors from centuries past. I wondered why she hadn't resorted to unforgivables. I'd later discuss with my spiritual research assistant and evolve the theory that the darkest curses technically require the caster to have a soul, no matter how shredded, because hell has no interest in providing power to those that it will never capture. But at the time, I was really worried that if she launched a killing curse, even if I could dodge, it might hit my friends behind me. So I was powerfully incentivized to bring the fight to her. Trusting that the two combat-untested prefects would be able to handle flammable mummies that had no ranged attacks, I charged the vampires. Several large strides carried me across the room. "Confringo, Incendio, Bombarda," I cast as I ran. Mavra easily dodged the blasting curse that went over her head, did that annoying point defense deflection to my fire-making charm that advanced wand duelists were so good at, and put up a full shield to keep my exploding charm from taking out her cover. But hopefully she wasn't prepared for me to then shout, "Lumos Solemn," as I rounded the bier. The bright, sunlight-adjacent variation of the light charm hadn't done much to the basilisk, but I hoped vampires were more vulnerable. Brilliant, blue-tinted light streamed from my mother's amulet on my chest, and the vampire shrieked as I caught her full in the blast. Transparent shields weren't much help against light. It didn't last long. "Finite incantatum," she hissed, and my light went out. I'd been just as blinded by the light as she was, so I didn't realize that she'd moved forward rather than back. As the light winked out, I realized she'd dispelled it from inches away. Faster than I could hope to block, she backhanded me with her wand hand, never ceasing drumming with the other, even as mummies began to spill from the other corridors, surrounding us. The blow to my head felt like a baseball bat wrapped in old leather. I suspected later that she hadn't even hit me as hard as she could have, for fear of snapping her own wand in the impact. I went down hard, fortunately onto the left side that wasn't usually taking punishment from hitting the ground in fights. Looming above me, shaking the stars out of my eyes, I saw that her pallid visage was now crispy like burned meat, and the look of smug amusement in her eyes had been replaced with barely controlled rage. "By my own hand, then, wizard," she growled, baring yellow teeth and diving at me faster than I could track. Holy Wars, the vampire was diving at me with hideous speed, while my friends tried to hold off an ever-growing army of reanimated mummies, when suddenly there was a shout of, "In the name of the Lord, avaunt," followed by a flare of golden light. Mavra immediately aborted her attack at my prone form and focused her wand at the new arrival, even missing a beat at her drumming and causing the undead to stumble. I looked toward the source of the shout and saw a burly white guy with short brown hair and a trimmed, dark beard standing amid chunks of hacked-up mummy coming out of the corridor closest to the exit. He was wearing jeans and a simple flannel shirt with a tool belt, and I thought I'd seen him around over the last few days helping to install the wooden support beams in the corridors. Also, he wielded a longsword that was possibly bigger than he was, and he wasn't a short man, emitting the golden glow, so that was unusual. "You!" Mavra screeched, even angrier at the sword-wielding craftsman than she'd been at me for burning her. "Wait, dark hair, beard, carpenter." I briefly entertained the idea that she'd accidentally reanimated Jesus with her necromantic drumming, but that would be silly. As silly as a caretaker showing up at just the right moment to save me with a giant sword. I was withholding judgment. Mavra starting firing curses at the guy, and he just batted them out of the air with the sword. The man simply strode across the chamber toward her, deflecting spells and calling, "Blood of the dragon, that old serpent, I cast you out." I finally got my legs moving and drunkenly stumbled up and away from the distracted vampire. Some mummies were emerging from the corridor we'd started in, so I shot a gout of flame at them while Percy and Penny tried to cover the horde coming out of the other areas. They were really stepping up, though their situational awareness wasn't great. Hopefully, all the fire wasn't going to start affecting our ability to breathe soon. As the handyman warrior got into melee range with Mavra, she started moving around. The vampire moved so quickly that she almost seemed to be apparating, but I knew she wasn't. The anti-apparition wards the Gringotts teams had set up to prevent antiques from teleporting off were still keeping us from taking the easy way out of the building. Instead, she was basically moving like the Flash, a blur of robes and a dopplering of drumming sounds. Yet despite this speed advantage, the swordsman was moving unerringly. His blade swings caught her spells and forced her to dodge, even though he was only at human speeds. Realizing she was distracted and this was my best shot, I lined up my blasting rod, anticipated where she was getting herded, and yelled, "Reducto." She still nearly dodged it, but I'd configured my object-shattering curse for high speed, low power. It just needed to do one thing, shatter the drum. It caught an edge under her elbow, and that was enough. The musical instrument broke into several pieces, pulling the skin in half as she made one last attempt at a downbeat. The remaining mummies staggered, confused for a few moments, and then began to collapse. Good. I'd remembered at the last second Percy's mention that some research suggested stopping the drummer merely freed the undead to do whatever they wanted. I didn't know if that was a different ritual, or she just hadn't built up enough power in them yet. Blowing up her drum also wrong-footed Mavra, and she was barely able to drop and roll to avoid being decapitated by the glowing sword. As it was, it cut the top off of her headdress, exposing matted, stringy hair to the light of the room. Tumbling back, glancing around, and realizing she was now significantly outnumbered, she clearly decided to leave. 3 wizards oriented to blast her, and there was just a streak of colors sprinting out the exit, 3 curses going her way and not quite landing. She didn't even have time for any repartee. Rude. There was a tense standoff as we all warily regarded each other and the collapsed bodies, many of them smoldering. Penny was the first to break the tension. Well, that's a big mess. She lowered her wand and asked, "Mr. Carpenter, right?" The big man, whose name was hopefully an on-the-nose cover identity like that of my werewolf friend, Remus Lupin, nodded and stepped back, the glow fading from the sword. I could see that he was perhaps in his 40s, older but still clearly athletic. I wouldn't have looked twice at him in any industrial district or construction project in the Western world. Penny had probably talked to him in passing because he reminded her of her father. Honestly, he had a pretty daddish vibe in general. I lowered my blasting rod and Percy followed with his wand, and I quipped, "How'd you get that sword in here? Magic hat." In my experience, wizard hats were the preferred method of moving big swords quietly. "In my bag with the shovels and pry bars," he chuckled, his accent indefinably Middle American. "Glad I didn't have to make do with hammers and framing squares." "Are you a focus caster like Harry?" Percy asked, nodding at my blasting rod compared to his and Penny's wands. To be fair, it wasn't much of a leap, given that I'd been running around casting with a broadsword a few weeks earlier. "Not exactly," he said, again with a wry grin, though I thought there was some wariness in his eyes. "I go where I'm needed, though. I was surprised to get an invitation to work on the other side of the world at a magical dig site, but now I know why." Seeing that he had our curiosity, he explained, "That vampire is an old enemy." My wariness was growing at his talk of invitations, and I asked, overly calmly, "You're not a rival assassin, then? Or wait, did someone pay you to watch my back? She was after you in particular, then?" he asked. "No, while I'm sure you're a fine young man, I usually don't get called in to save a single life. I suspect once she'd killed you, she planned to unleash that horde on the campsite above, and then use those bodies to terrorize the nearby human city. Or, at the very least, she'd then have plenty of time to find dark artifacts in these tombs that she absolutely shouldn't take possession of." "Some kind of Macusa counterterrorism force, then?" Penny asked. She'd been hyper-aware of terrorist groups since her father was injured in an era bombing the previous year, plus all the Death Eater attacks on myself and the school. "Kind of. Not the wizarding government, though. I answer to a higher power. But effectively, yes, a lot of the time I find myself in between innocents and forces that would unleash terror upon them. I felt like there was a faint stress on higher power, but I didn't feel great about pursuing it since he was giving up more information than he probably had to. He just might give me an answer." "Not unlike Harry," Percy grinned. "You weren't so bad yourself, Perce," I told him, looking around the room. "You too, Penny." "I didn't know you'd both been doing combat drills together." "It seemed prudent," my roommate shrugged. "Neither of us has your raw power, but we are more likely to be attacked together, so coordination gives us an advantage." Mr. Carpenter's face looked sad, and off my quirked eyebrow he said, "I hate to see kids having to deal with this kind of thing so early. Just thinking about my own children getting involved at all, much less as teenagers." Penny clearly wanted to ask him about his kids, but we were interrupted as the whole Curse Breaker squad came pouring down the stairs, along with most of our adult chaperones. Wands out, they probably weren't prepared to see us casually talking in the middle of the room, surrounded by a defeated undead horde. "All right, folks," the lead redhead asked. While it was hard to think of most people as truly tall, given my own freakish height, Bill was, so far, the tallest of the Weasleys, though I thought Ron might give him a run for his money as he finished growing. He was the one who actually worked here, that the vacation was based around getting to see. Long hair pulled into a ponytail and a pierced ear that Mrs. Weasley had already complained to all of us about, he gave off a vibe of being competent and dangerous, only mitigated by my introduction to him amid getting smothered by his mom and baby sister. Also, Mad-Eye Moody had been right. Bill did look more like the paranoid aura than his own father. Wizarding genetics were weird. The vampire escaped, and Harry took a hit to the head, but I think otherwise fine, Percy summarized. We barely saw her passing and put up guards and wards, Bill acknowledged. That's what kept us. Glad you had some help, Mr. Carpenter, right? He asked, wary of the giant and seemingly ancient longsword that our new friend had point down but not stowed. Michael Carpenter, shouted a voice from the throng of wizards, and Percy's second oldest brother stepped forward, aghast. Charlie was the one Weasley boy that seemed to most take after his mother, short and stocky. The lack of height had apparently served him well as Quidditch seeker, but he'd bulked up working at a dragon preserve in Romania the last couple of years. He kept his own red hair very short, one might even say singed, and his complexion already showed a few burn scars that not even magic could completely heal. It is you. I've seen the pictures. This asshole is a dragon poacher. You have the story wrong, Michael said calmly, but with a hint of danger. You're saying you didn't kill Siriathrax 7 years ago, Charlie insisted. He was probably the oldest living dragon in Europe. How much did you get selling his parts? Nothing. He was possessed by a dark entity and had been kidnapping mortals to devour. Michael could have ended his statement there, but went on. But I guess wizards generally care little for the depredations of monsters as long as they aren't killing your kind. The longsword may have lifted a little more off the floor, not quite into a combat stance, but ready to get there. Wands of the incoming posse weren't exactly being lowered. Fortunately, Mr. Weasley moved forward and laid one hand on Charlie's wand arm and one on Bill's shoulder. It sounds like Mr. Carpenter felt he had a good reason, and I take it he was very helpful in driving off that vampire. Penny, Percy, and I nodded. Then perhaps we can worry about this over tea rather than wands. With his father crimping his righteous dragon handler anger, likely second-hand, since he must have been like 12 when it happened. Charlie grudgingly stowed his wand. Everyone else soon followed suit, and Michael moved his immense sword to a relaxed stance and suggested he need to go get the sheath where he'd left it up the corridor. As he was walking off, and everyone was calming down about the unexpected swordsman, the Gringotts employed curse-breakers and archaeologists in the group finally realized that they were looking at the undifferentiated, mostly burned bodies of dozens of historical mummies and the spell-damaged walls of the ancient tomb. They started making very sad noises. Sorry, I shrugged. We really did try to just stop the drumming. But vampire. Flown felon, vampires now, Harry. Yelled the reddish brown-haired witch who hugged me the moment I stepped back up to the surface. A couple dozen folks that were apparently prevented from going running into a potential vampire zombie outbreak were waiting anxiously around the entryway down to the tomb complex. Just crossing off the whole defense against the dark arts curriculum one at a time to get that Newt review in, I joked to my girlfriend. Seriously, I'm fine. Just a bump on the head. How was the creature preserve? See any Nundu, Nundus, Nundi? I wasn't sure about the plural. No, but they had strelers and erumpents. We got you some potion ingredients. It was lucky, since they'd been sold out until recently, but they got a fresh batch. That was great. I've been wishing I'd had more erumpent potion on hand when I found myself without my blasting rod and facing down 2 Voldemorts, a Death Eater and a Basilisk. But don't change the subject. Why does this always happen to you? This time. I shouldn't have been in that picture for the paper. Bounty hunters know where I am, I explained. A good point, said Mr. Longbottom, the balding aura, who'd been listening from a few feet away. Perhaps we should go ahead and move to the second leg of our vacation. I don't want to make everyone leave, I demurred. Nonsense, he said. While I'm sure the Weasleys have been happy to spend time with Bill, a week at a campsite in the desert is more than enough for me. And I'm sure, especially for those that don't consider it a holiday to try to translate hieroglyphics. Caro next. Mathilda grinned. My girlfriend was very smart, but had almost zero interest in runes and magical theory. They have shopping and restaurants. You just left him there. I heard yelling and looked over to see Ron Weasley and Neville Longbottom accosting Draco. The two didn't have their whole posse, since Seamus Finnegan hadn't been able to afford the trip, and Hermione Granger wasn't going to meet us until later. Her family had already planned to go to France for part of the summer, but Draco hadn't brought any of his normal backup. And I'm going to do more than just be in the way. Draco spat back, not giving ground. Maybe you two think you would have stayed and helped, or would you just have been a liability? And nobody up here would have known anything because bloody Gryffindors all think they have to fight every battle. It wasn't entirely a fair assessment, since Ron and Neville were extremely competent in a fight for 13-year-olds. They'd had to be. Neither had been in nearly as many scrapes as I had, but they'd each been in at least 3 life-or-death battles I could think of off the top of my head. And ever since they realized Voldemort was a threat, they'd been taking their training very seriously. Of course, Draco was also probably getting a lot of the same training I had from my godmother, his aunt. Not that I'd recommend the Bellatrix Lestrange course in magical combat to anyone. This had been the first time I'd seen him in any kind of real fight, and he'd at least attacked, rather than fleeing when he first saw the skeletons coming at us. Though he was holding his own, I moved over, arms still wrapped around Mathilda, who didn't seem inclined to let me wander off any time soon. "It's okay, guys," I told them. I would have told Draco to go. I tried to get Penny and Percy to take off too. Mathilda jammed a knuckle in my rib, making me wince, and growled, "Did they help? Would you have died if they hadn't stayed?" I thought about objecting, then shrugged. Having them watching my back had let me focus on Mavra for all the good that did. Without them, I might have gotten overwhelmed before Michael showed up. "Then stop it. We get to decide if we have your back or not." Draco's face fell a little, so she added, "But it's also fine if having your back means getting more help." Speaking of Michael, he was leaving the tomb with an oversized duffel bag hung over his shoulder and a toolbox in his hand. It probably really was an effective way to get around with a giant sword. Maybe I should consider something similar for my staff. Ginny Weasley, Luna Lovegood, and little Julia Longbottom, late to the commotion, wandered up, but Luna only had eyes for the sword-wielding carpenter. "Who is that?" the little blonde seer asked. "Some kind of American battle mage, I think," I told her. "He has a giant sword that he fought off the vampire with. Says he solves dark magic problems." "I don't think he's a wizard," she shook her head. "I've never seen anyone like him before. It's like the golden ribbons at school." Luna had seemed to see it when our school's fortune magic wards bent probability to make sure the students and teachers wouldn't get killed while on campus. "Only he's tied to the whole world, or at least as far as I can see. They're pulling him north." "Ha," I said. "It's kind of exhausting getting manipulated into being in the right place to save someone just at Hogwarts. Must be tiring if he's doing that for all of planet Earth." I guess he did say something about being surprised about an invitation to come out here. Maybe he meant it was fate intervening rather than someone in particular hiring him. "Maybe not fate. Maybe not exactly," Luna said mysteriously, then added, "I'll figure it out." "Core," Ron breathed. I didn't think he'd really bought into Luna's gifts until just then, but he suddenly realized. "Luna, think you could help me with my divination homework this year?" He saw my eyes widen as I was about to object, then insisted. "I'm taking Muggle studies and care of magical creatures, too. I know it's woolly, but 3 extracurriculars look better than 2, and I'm not going to make it in the brainy ones like the rest of you." Neville and Draco looked like they were about to call him on not taking arithmancy or runes, but then shrugged in agreement. Luna simply smiled. "I'll see what I can do, Ronald. I don't really know much about the formal tools." I'm excited to find out next year, though. "So did I hear we're going to Cairo?" Ginny asked. The youngest Weasley had been enjoying spending time with her 2 eldest brothers, but seemed to have exhausted her interests in the camp's limited amenities, especially since nobody would let her play adventurer all by herself in the tombs at her age. Because Oliver said they're supposed to have an indoor Quidditch pitch in camp, and maybe we can rent the same kind of broom and have a real race, Draco. As everyone was surprised that the aloof Slytherin shrugged and nodded his assent to his rival seeker, I asked Mathilda, "Where is Oliver, anyway? Didn't he come back with you from the preserve?" I hadn't seen my other roommate loitering about. "He and Lexi went straight to the tent," my girlfriend explained, and she looked over and noticed all of the adult chaperones having an animated conversation, probably about what had just happened and moving on. "And you got a bump on the head. I should help you take care of that, in private. Wouldn't want it to get infected or anything." I grinned, and the 2 of us waved goodbye to the younger kids and sneaked off. To be fair, I noticed that Percy and Penny had made themselves scarce, too. Something about the adrenaline spike of a life-or-death battle. We actually had a whole hour to ourselves in one of the palatial rooms of the wizard-spaced tent Draco had provided for our group. Technically, the girls were in one tent, and this one was just Oliver, Percy, Draco, and me. But the kid was an excellent landlord, and well, the chaperones weren't paying that much attention. "Put your shirts on," the Slytherin in question drawled from the main room of the tent. More problems. 6 older teenagers spilled out, clothing in various levels of disarray, and I asked Draco, "What's up?" "It's a good thing we're moving, because I've just had a letter from my father." He waved the parchment in question, Lucius Malfoy's handwriting visible. "It seems someone else saw the picture in the paper. My cousin, Sirius Black, has escaped from Azkaban." Chapter 30, Hexcon 2, Slum Dogs. Chapter text sook and destroy. This is nice, Penny opined, sitting back sipping from her coffee. "I never really expected to be able to afford the whole bumming around Europe thing, you know." I looked out around the Kama souk, Caro's version of Diagon Alley, a tourist trap of a magical shopping district, and couldn't help but agree. The place was basically straight out of Indiana Jones, so only probably 50 years behind rather than Britain's century-plus lag for magical architecture. It was nice. "Me either," I agreed, enjoying my own overly strong coffee. The two of us were holding down our table at the outdoor coffee shop, a hard-won place in the best shade, and with 6 seats. We'd been trading off who stayed behind to guard it while everyone else explored, and as long as we kept ordering coffee, the owner didn't seem to mind. We were going to be so wired by lunchtime. Currently, Mathilda and Alexis were in a nearby clothing store. Percy was checking out the bookstore, and Oliver had demanded a chance to check out the broom shop. He was passing up a chance to go broom racing with the kids, after all, so he had to get his Quidditch energy out somehow. That had been vital, however, since the athletic fun day had pulled off all the younger kids, and importantly, all the parental chaperones. It was just the 6 of us on our own. I think they may have forgotten that Mathilda wasn't technically an adult yet. It was still weird that the rest of us, being 17, counted as grown-ups in wizarding society. I didn't expect to be trusted to go off on my own like this until I was 18, maybe not even until 21. I couldn't even vote yet, let alone drink. Wait. I probably could legally drink, at least at wizarding bars. And I could legally drink in British muggle bars in a few more months. The world of possibilities this opened up. "Oh, weird, is that Michael?" Penny asked, pointing with her coffee cup across the way. Sure enough, a mysterious sword-wielding savior was sitting at another outdoor cafe several storefronts down. It looked like that one served breakfast and juice. He didn't have his sword, but was still rocking the jeans and button-down, which is probably how Penny noticed in the otherwise robe-centric area. The man he was having breakfast with seemed like a local, long grey hair and beard but dark skin and still tall and fit. His robes seemed like he had money. "I wonder who that guy is. Another secret global protector." "What guy?" Mathilda's voice asked from behind us. We'd been focused enough spying on Michael that I hadn't noticed her and Alexis get back. I turned to answer but just got out. "Wow," to my girlfriend's obvious amusement. She changed into the new robes she'd bought, and I used that term guardedly. They were more like a sundress, made of something diaphanous in a red and gold pattern, probably very comfortable in the summer Egyptian heat despite being, well, clingy. We saw a nice dress." "I think you broke Harry," Penny laughed. "We saw Michael over there and wondered who the guy was that he's talking to." "The guy with the sword that showed up to help you fight mummies?" Alexis asked. She and Oliver had missed all the excitement a few days earlier by rushing off as soon as they got back. I noticed she'd also bought and worn new robes in cooler cream and reddish brown to better match her dark-haired complexion. Oliver was likely to have his own problem communicating once he got back. "Let's go be nosy," Mathilda suggested, seeing that Michael had said his goodbyes and headed off, but the mystery man was still lingering at his table. If my brain had been in gear, I might have objected to just bothering a potentially dangerous older wizard, but I was halfway there before I really realized where we were going. I picked out giggling from Penny and Alexis as they stayed guarding our table behind us. "Hi," Matilda greeted the man without pretense. "Are you a friend of Michael's?" Close, despite his grey hair and beard, the man's skin wasn't terribly wrinkled or thin, and he still seemed to have an athletic build under his blue and grey robes. but his dark eyes seemed almost impossibly old and wise as he regarded us. I didn't make eye contact, but Mathilda did, and after a moment he smiled and gestured us to take a seat. Indeed, I suppose you were involved in the unfortunate recent affairs of vampires he told me of. Well, Harry was. She was after him. I missed it. Mathilda gave away. It was probably good that she didn't have plans to become a professional card player. Vampires. They're supposed to be under control these days. Sadly, the degree to which the vampiric courts are willing to pretend to be civilized directly depends on the power of the nation they are confronting. They have generally found it inadvisable to target wizards, but still prove quite dangerous to the mundane population. He explained, echoing what Michael had said. His accent was perfectly clear English, a hybrid of an upper-class British accent, the local flair, and an almost Germanic undertone. And you take up the sword and defend the defenseless yourself. I guessed. Not in quite some time, he shrugged. My place is now as teacher rather than upon the field. Were I to take up the sword again, well, others that have retired may also choose to step in. Best to let younger people lead the fight. His eyes didn't quite twinkle the way Dumbledore managed, but it was clear that he knew he was showing he knew more than he should as he explained, people like yourself, if I had to hazard a guess, Harry Dresden. Legilimency, I suggested, worried about his eye contact with Mathilda. Or Michael told you. Neither, he waved my guesses away. While I am retired, I receive news. Both your English magical newspaper and word of those who were using it to hunt you. It was wise to change locations, but news of your presence in Curra will follow you. Stay wary. You strike me, sadly, much like Michael, as a young man destined for a life of needing to watch your back. I've got people for that, too, I said, squeezing Mathilda's hand under the table. She grinned that I was finally getting it. I picked up on the reference and asked, is anyone watching Michael's? On this earthly plane, not so much. The sword-bearers tend to lead short, lonely lives. Michael has lasted longer than most. He has a support network, but refuses to put anyone else but himself in danger. Sounds familiar, Mathilda joked. He nodded. It has always been a paradox that the stronger the man, the harder it is for him to admit when he needs help. You would think he would have less to prove, but no. It's good, I think, that women are more and more able to take the field themselves, as they tend to be less prone to the same dangerous assumptions. We go into wilderness, kill mammoth, bring home to women back home, we're safe, I grunted, owning that he was basically calling me a caveman. Quite, but it's easy to forget that humans never killed a mammoth without a hunting party, and Michael is after something far more dangerous than that. I'm getting what you're saying, I told him. Where do I? I glanced at Mathilda's sudden frown. We need to go to back him up. The guy had probably saved me from Mavra. I owed him for that, even if it wasn't my natural disposition to jump in when there was a fight that didn't actually concern me. And that's how all 6 of us wound up down in the bad section of the Curro Magical District, where we'd absolutely promised our chaperones we wouldn't go, incidentally. Mathilda, who changed from her distracting new clothing into her more protective, but less breathable, creature-minding robes, was finishing explaining. There was a mysterious old man in a tavern handing out quests. Of course, we had to agree and form a party. She had been reading Arcanos, the role-playing game, after it had proved so useful for identifying petrifying creatures the previous year, and had already been picking up the tropes. She wanted to run a campaign once school started again. Alexis had already called dibs on playing the party wizard, causing grumbling from everyone else. Has anyone actually been to Nocturne Alley? Percy asked, suddenly realizing that we were in the bad part of a wizarding town in a foreign country, and we weren't even used to the bad part of town in Britain. Maybe we should have brought Malfoy. Rather than keeping the seedier businesses on a distinct thoroughfare like in London, the magical souk in Curro featured a courtyard off the Muggle area and nearby streets that were touristy, and a gradually diminishing level of gentrification the further away you got from the center. At this point, we were pushing deep into territory that Muggle aerial photos showed as being beneath the Nile. When the settlement was founded, the regular seasonal inundation had probably rendered these parts of the Kama district uninhabitable for large parts of the year. These days, they were just a labyrinthine slum. I've been meaning to ask about that. Alexis piped up in her English accent, with an undercurrent of her birth and early years in France. She'd also switched back to more practical clothes, much to Oliver's disappointment. We're just friends with Malfoys now. Draco seems like a nice enough kid, but Harry has a plan. Mathilda defended me. Admittedly, not sure if he's converting Draco or Draco's converting us, but a plan. Thanks, Thilda, I told her, slightly sarcastically. I think he could be a lot better than his family, with proper role models, but agreed. I feel like I was kind of tricked into being his entourage this summer. I don't like when his dad's plans are involved. Alexis nodded. I can appreciate how much having a rich kid along is increasing our standard of vacation, and I haven't heard him say anything especially bad. But Death Eater parents, though, right? I actually have no idea what Lucius Malfoy is up to, I admitted. He could have helped not, but he didn't seem to. Maybe just because that crew was trying to keep the circle small. When Canticorous Nut had been marshalling the Wisengamot to clear Hogwarts for their plan to revitalize Lord Voldemort, Malfoy had appeared to be uninvolved and amused, and I couldn't voice my suppositions that he was deeply embroiled in whatever plot my godmother, his sister-in-law, had involving the Sidhe, which seemed totally unrelated to Voldemort's plans. But Mathilda could. That crazy half-sister of his. It may be that Draco really wants away from her this summer. Or he could be trying to help her with whatever her plan is. Since her slut bomb thing doesn't work on my Harry, there was a round of nods. Whatever the Winter Lady's strategy at Hogwarts, Mathilda had done a better job than I had of making sure Maeve wouldn't get her hooks into Gryffindor. I think he may be getting sweet on Ginny without his Slytherin gang around, Penny ventured. We should make that happen. The girls started chatting conspiratorially, while Percy, Oliver, and I tried to maintain some situational awareness in this magical slum. Small alleys and multi-story buildings making it hard to even remember that it was still early afternoon. That awareness was only partially successful, giving us a few moments' warning as a small local man peeled himself off the shadows of an alley and declared, "British tourists. Lost, are you?" in heavily accented English. We'd probably gotten this deep without being bothered by being 6 members, but I counted more than that of humanoid figures still lurking in the area. We'd wandered right into a trap. Not particularly, thanks, I told him. Just a bunch of poor kids trying to find a cheap place to drink. Heard there was one in the area. Nothing that way but Necropolis, our mugger said. He reminded me a lot of Mundungus Fletcher, a fixture of the British underworld that kept floating up into the shop where I'd worked the previous summer. He didn't have the leprechaun afro of red hair, though. You kids don't want to go there. We did. We have no money, Mathilda insisted, breaking off her conversation about Draco's love life in a tone of voice that implied the man was stupid. Are we going to fight? Maybe I shouldn't have explained to my girlfriend, the only one of our group still not quite of age, that the Egyptian magical government barely policed the trace on their own people, much less on tourists. At least that's what my research had suggested. The rest of my friends had their wands out and looked ready to throw down. I shook my shield bracelet out of my sleeve and readied my staff. Apparently a half-dozen teens who'd had way too much coffee were not ready to negotiate with muggers. The shadows moved as the gang of locals got into position, and I hoped we were as hot shit as we thought we were. Necropolitan, the fight went surprisingly well. Mathilda had gotten wrapped up in fighting wargs and dark wizards with me. Oliver had been in a few of my fights, even though he'd mostly been out of danger or taken out early. Penny and Percy had obviously been training together. Alexis was the big unknown, but she didn't get to be a Gryffindor prefect because she was a slouch at magic or afraid to fight. The gang of thugs had probably assumed a half-dozen teens would be easy pickings. Honestly, in a fight where nobody was throwing unforgivables or had terrifying monster powers, the whole thing felt a little non-threatening for me. Maybe I was getting too blasé. I had little trouble holding off everything coming in on my flank with my shield. Oliver and Percy shielded against the other directions. It was honestly amusing watching the members of the gang attacking us realize that it was the 3 girls of the group that were taking them out with pretty accurate stunners. The magicals of Egypt had never really embraced Islam any more than those of Europe had embraced Christianity, but the patriarchal notions still seeped in. They broke and ran when 5 of them were down, dragging their stunned friends off into the labyrinth. "Good job, team," I told everyone. It had been our first fight as a group, and for Alexis, her first real fight at all. There were smiles all around, but before the inevitable adrenaline crash set in, I suggested, "Let's get going, before our reputation precedes us." It wasn't too much further to Necropolis. It wasn't an actual necropolis, which I understood were usually kept on the west side of the river while we were on the east, but an establishment with that name. "Now I really feel like an adult," Oliver quipped. "Go and tee my first bad neighborhood pub." While it looked like the actual structure was a simple masonry rectangle taking up the ground floor of the apartment block with a front entrance on the alley and a back that might drop right into the Nile, the decoration made it much more complex. The room was broken into a twisting array of booths and tables with partitions snaking around them. They were probably ideal for making it difficult to listen in on conversations or being certain who was there at any given point. But it was pretty clear that, this early in the afternoon, the place was close to as dead as its name. Only a few tables had guests, possibly there for the lunch special. The bar was near the front door and looked pretty new. Simple wood without too many stains from long use. But it already had signs of having been repaired with magic, faint scars that didn't quite set back properly due to missing material. My guess was that the place got rowdy, and the bar had to be replaced pretty often when someone smashed it or blew it up in a bar fight. Slowly taking count for the night and stocking new bottles of liquor from crates, the barman was an actual ghoul, not trying to hide his deformed, mouthy features. "Great, effin' tourists," he muttered in an indefinable European accent. Louder, he suggested, "You've seen the sights, kids. Buy a drink, then get back to the main drag before dark. Full moon tonight." As potentially the most cosmopolitan of the six of us, at least as much as she'd spent a lot of her childhood on the European continent, we'd elected Alexis our spokesperson. The dark-haired witch sauntered up to the bar like she was in a film noir and said, "We're not just here to see the sights, we're looking for information." It might have been a better delivery if there hadn't been 5 other teens in various states of gaping tourist mode. It probably didn't help that we were all clearly various shades of not wealthy. A mysterious and worldwide source of a potentially big bribe, we were not. Maybe we should have sent her in alone. The bartender smirked with a smile that went way further back on his face than it had any right to and said, "Pick a table. Maybe you'll learn a lot." And that's how we wound up at a large table to the side of the room, Day drinking in a seedy wizard bar. Penny and Percy had done a number of detection spells on everyone's drinks for both intentional and unintentional toxins, and still both nearly spit out their room temperature beer. Mathilda and Alexis sipped politely at theirs, but their glasses weren't lowering much over time. I was being much more mature, I thought, appreciating all the flavor of beer brewed in the nation that had a pretty good argument for having invented it. Which is to say that I also wasn't a big drinker, but I thought I could eventually acquire the taste. Oliver complained that it wasn't as good as Guinness, but happily drank his down. I once again marveled that one of my best friends was such a high school jock stereotype. While the night crowd at the bar was probably way more interesting, there were nearly a dozen patrons that filtered through while we were there. A couple of old women that might have been hags were actually trying the lunch special, so I really wasn't interested in it. A guy passed through at one point whose tics reminded me of Remus before a transformation, so hopefully he was just getting one for the road before locking himself up for the upcoming full moon that evening. Perhaps the most interesting was the man holding court with a half-dozen hooded wizards that slunk in one by one throughout the afternoon. Despite his guests being locals, from what we could see of their faces, he stood out more than our group as a foreigner. Tall and fair-skinned, he wore a dark silk shirt, blue jeans, and a red ball cap. And if the looks the ladies at our table were giving him were anything to go by, he had the same kind of impossible she-beauty as Maeve. Okay, fine. I could also tell that he was a real hottie. Lacking anything better to do, I tried to overhear his conversation, even though the arrangement of the room scattered noise, and the magically powered fans pulling air through the building from the Nile exit weren't helping either, although they did keep the building merely uncomfortably warm rather than sweltering. It also didn't help that he was a native language speaker, and I wasn't. but the general gist I got was one of planning and convincing of some upcoming event. Hopefully, they were just arranging a dark magic bake sale. Finally, they broke up their conference and he headed out. Oliver, headed back from the bar with another pint, bumped into one of the wizards who was heading out. "Sorry, pal," he said, brushing off the guy's robe. "No harm done." The group froze for a moment, but then decided not to bother with British tourists. As the ringleader walked past the table at the rear of his group, I realized that his red cap had an Oakland Raiders logo, and I thought they only did black and white apparel. Even the logo was red and black, and the cap looked slightly damp, like it had been recently dyed red, or dipped in a reddish substance. "Lefacen," he tipped his bloody ball cap to me as he walked past, a knowing smirk on his face, carefully stepping around Oliver. Great, the Fae all knew me on sight at this point. "What did he call you?" Percy asked as the she in the red cap left the building. I tried to figure out how to explain in a way that wouldn't catch on all the things my implicit oaths to my godmother and Maeve prevented me from saying about the she. My mother got the nickname Margaret Leffe because of some of her extracurricular interests. I know at least one house elf that called me that. "He's like Maeve," Mathilda got it. "A boy, Maeve," Alexis said, it almost seeming to slip out. She flushed when everyone looked at her, but Penny and Mathilda giggled too. "And if you're right, Maeve is one of the Fae," Oliver interjected. "So who's that guy, and what's he up to?" "His cap didn't start out that color," I suggested. "Merlin's beard, Harry." Mathilda suddenly lost some of the effect his aura and appearance had on her. "You're saying that's like a full Never-Never version of a red cap. They're already triple X threats. And not nearly that hot," Alexis grinned. I shrugged, just guessing based on how damp that hat was, and how that team's sporting apparel is normally black and white. "So what now?" asked Penny. "Do we just, wait here, or follow that guy, or maybe we should?" She was interrupted by a tremendous crash of breaking wood and plaster toward the back of the room near where the red cap and his meeting had been sitting. A section of the ceiling caved in, and a large person covered in splinters and dust barely landed safely, groaning and rolling away as the table partially broke his fall. Staggering to his feet, it took me a moment to recognize Michael due to all the masonry and plaster dust stuck to him. A pair of 8-foot-tall brutes dropped confidently from above into the detritus. One of the ogres told the bartender, "Caught someone peeping." Exasperated, the ghoul asked, "Then why didn't you throw him into the river instead of through the floor?" "Oh," the burly creature grunted. "Guess we'll do that now." They both moved to try to herd Michael out the back, and the man hadn't brought his sword. "Does that answer your question?" I asked Penny as we shoved out from behind our table to help. Terror tactics ogres, it turns out, are magic resistant. I don't know why I was surprised. Most aggressive, sentient non-humans seem to be. Maybe it was some kind of forced adaptation. Most of the intelligent creatures that couldn't either use magic or resist it got wiped out or subjugated. Humans are nothing if not thorough when we discover an advantage over the things that go bump in the night. It made sense that things like wargs basically only existed in the Never-Never these days. Ghouls, it turns out, are not. An ambush predator that mostly preys on muggles, maybe they somehow kept out of the way of human wizards enough to survive as a race. This was unlike Necropolis bartender, who decided to jump in and back up the two ogres as soon as our group stepped in to help Michael. I don't think they're ever going to let us back in that bar. Wasting no time, Michael had scooped up a nearby chair and smashed it to pieces on the face of the nearest ogre, staggering it back. A half-dozen stunners from my crew spread between them only seemed to slightly make the ogres woozy for a moment. It was enough for Michael to dodge a backswing and do some kind of judo move to make the attacking ogre plow through a partition and crush another table. That was when the bartender jumped in, making upset noises and unhinging his jaw until his mouthful of sharp teeth took up most of his face. For some reason, his predator instincts sent him after Mathilda instead of a bigger threat, like her boyfriend standing next to her with a 7-foot length of oak. I managed to knock several of those teeth out with my swing before the others tried stunning him. He went right down. I probably should have tried that first. He surprised me. I insisted, my friends having the usual shocked disconnect upon seeing a wizard use physical violence instead of a spell. Michael was doing extremely well against the still-standing ogre, trading blows with the hulking brute in a way that none of us could have managed. While it was hell on the furnishings, Michael seemed to have an excellent awareness for improvised weapons he could grab as he dodged blows. Not that anything in the room was really sturdy enough to survive a couple of impacts against the beast. Before the judo-thrown ogre could get back up, Percy, Penny, and Alexis had buried it in an array of conjured ropes and transfigured furnishings. Though its bindings creaked ominously, it seemed to be sufficiently cocooned that it wasn't going anywhere soon. But the other one was much more of a moving target. While my friends were better at combat transfiguration than I was, they still weren't anywhere near Professor McGonagall's level. She'd have probably had the guy sinking into the floor. I had a thought and yelled at Michael, "Keep falling back." I extricated myself from our table, lined up with the back door, drew my blasting rod, and started pulling in magic. As soon as the ogre was in between me and the view of the Nile, I told Michael, "Down, Bombarder." The exploding charm doesn't usually do much to living flesh. It's meant for blowing holes in walls, not in people. But I didn't want to pulp the ogre. I wanted to take advantage of the shockwave that inevitably results from unstoppable forces meeting immovable objects. He could ignore the magic, but not the physics of the floor beneath him suddenly turning into a crater. I couldn't really hear him over the explosive thrum of shattering tiles, but I like to think he made a very surprised noise as he went on a parabolic arc, smashed his head through the lintel over the back door, and belly flopped into the river. "Yeah, bar fight," Oliver yelled, and smashed his mug over the head of the tied-up ogre. It didn't do much other than make my roommate feel good about himself. Across the room, Michael had avoided most of the floor shrapnel because I have excellent aim and also because he was very good at dodging, and rolled to his feet. He took in the catastrophe around him, saw that all the other opponents were down, and started brushing dust off of himself. I figured the look he was giving me was a mix of exasperation and gratitude. Honestly, as covered as his face was with smashed flooring, it was hard to really make out. Taking pity on the guy, Penny waved her wand at him and incanted Turgia, causing most of the dust to fly off of his skin and clothes in a puff. He seemed pretty bruised up underneath, but considering he'd just been smashed through a floor and fought an ogre in hand-to-hand, he looked great. He had reacted slightly at Penny's spell before realizing it wasn't a threat. "Did you need anything around here?" I asked, maybe slightly loudly, my ears still ringing from the explosion. "If not, we should probably leave." As the seven of us strode out into the mid-afternoon sun in the alley, the heat of the day was like stepping into an oven, even in the shade of the building. Not seeing the red cap or his entourage, Michael started to stride back toward the safer section of the district. He asked, "You followed me?" "Your friend kind of suggested that we should," I told him. "Ah, you talked to Knack, the old meddler," he said. "I guess he wasn't wrong. Thanks for the help." "Worries," I said. "You were there for the red cap. I grunted in annoyance, unable to finish the statement. "We've been having problems with she in Britain as well," Mathilda translated for me. I squeezed her shoulder in thanks. "Seems suspicious that they're all over. The immortal races are moving in a way I've never seen," Michael nodded. "I'm not sure who's behind it. First Mavra, now this, and other rumors of coordination. I don't like it." "Do you know what they were meeting about?" I asked. "My Arabic isn't great," the big man admitted, as we finally turned a corner into a shadier part of the district, the temperature dropping several degrees to merely hot instead of baking. "But I think they were organizing some kind of attack, but not so much on a person as on maybe the city itself. I heard something about acquiring explosives." "Terrorists," Penny practically growled. "We have to stop them." "I'm not really sure where to begin," Michael admitted. "Well," Oliver piped up, "that guy I bumped didn't keep his robes the cleanest, or his beard that short." "Ali," Alexis smacked him on the arm in delighted disgust. "Tell me you did not pickpocket some creepy wizard's beard hair. I thought tea might be useful." The Quidditch captain shrugged sheepishly. "I've been looking into tracking spells," I nodded. After the auras had caught me 2 years prior, I'd been briefly fascinated by them. "Haven't had a chance to try one yet, but I could give it a go." "I don't know if I should be involving a bunch of teens in this," Michael demurred. "We're nosy," Mathilda summed up for the group. "If not with you, we'll get in trouble somewhere else. Might as well keep an eye on us." "And we're all legally adults anyway," Penny said, failing to point out that Mathilda wasn't quite yet. Michael sighed, but he was clearly out of his depth and not willing to pass up a bunch of help. Fine, but if I tell you it's too dangerous, I need you to listen to me. Who does that sound like? Mathilda grinned, elbowing me. Percy, who'd been turning it over in his head for a while and ignoring the ongoing conversation, piped up. The old man's name is Nakhat. Interestingly, one of the little-known Arthurian knights, thought to be a potential protector of the Grail, had that name. He was supposed to have originally come from Egypt, where Merlin and some knights met him as a street urchin and took him back with them to Britain. You don't say. Michael smiled, eyes glinting like that wasn't a surprise to him. Surveillance, state, the tracking spell led us to the far eastern edge of the magical district. Since we'd only been a few minutes behind the guy when we realized we could use it, it had changed direction as we walked. My mother's amulet that I'd tied the sympathy components to periodically changing the direction was tugging toward the wizard we were following. In the haphazard labyrinth of buildings, we were losing ground just adjusting to get around buildings that were in the way, guessing how he'd gone around them based on where it had been tugging before. So when it started tugging down, we started looking for a sewer grate or basement. It would have helped if anyone was a local. Finally, as the sun was starting to set, and the tracking spell had about used up the material available, Alexis found a concealed basement door next her building, and we went down. The tunnel beneath ran further east, and we must have been leaving the magical part of Kama and into the Muggle city, a large suburb north of Cairo proper. I'm tapped out, guys, I said, as the charm finally broke. I think we found what we needed, Michael said as we entered a larger space, ready for a fight. We were having to use light charms to see, so we couldn't exactly sneak up on anyone. Looks like a staging area. The underground room wasn't that big, but had transfigured stone countertops installed against the earthen walls, and venting chimneys running away and toward the surface. Michael had clearly noticed the square spots of absent dust on the floor near a large doorway on the opposite side of the room, but didn't understand the significance of the rest of the furniture. It looks like a potions lab that has had its apparati removed, Percy seconded, aloud what I'd been thinking. So they were brewing something, packing it up, and then taking it into the mundane parts of the city, Michael figured. There's still dust in the air like they were here for the last load this afternoon. Do we know any diagnostic charms to figure out what they were brewing? Penny asked Percy and Alexis. Don't bother, I told them, standing near the brewing station and sniffing. I recognize the smell. Mathilda just bought me new components to make it. A rampant potion, she exclaimed. Michael raised a questioning eyebrow, and I explained, magical explosive. Think of it like nitroglycerine, more stable, bigger boom. And I bet it doesn't leave a chemical residue or use precursors the government could track, the swordsman guessed. Same or denser form factor as nitro. I nodded, and he grimaced. If all the crates it looks like were in here were full, this could be a tremendous amount of explosive. The merchants at the preserve, Mathilda said. They told me I was lucky to catch them when they had some fresh. There was a lot of demand for their supply in the city. They hadn't been able to keep it in stock. Can you track the supply that way? See who was buying it? Michael asked. I can ask my brother, Percy nodded. Though wizarding vendors do not really keep extensive records unless legally required. Perhaps we could. Lights, I hissed, cutting him off. Someone's coming. I'd hopefully heard the steps before the new arrival heard us. We quickly moved back to the side of the room and doused our lights, refocusing eyes making out another light coming from the hallway down which they'd presumably taken the crates. Probably the same guy we'd been following entered the room, his wand lit and held high. Before he even registered the illumination falling on the 7 people in the room, he'd been hit with 3 stunners. I needed to look into whether it was dangerous to do that before we killed someone by all stunning them at once. Fortunately, the guy didn't have any backup. We took his wand, tied him up, and revived him. We'd agreed to let Michael take the lead while we all stood behind the guy. If for some reason he went to the auras, we had a lot more to lose than the swordsman did since he could get out via plane while we had to take a state-controlled portkey. I want to know about the rampant potions. Talk, Michael ordered him. Something about his command seemed designed to speak to the guy's very soul. It wasn't a magical compulsion exactly, but just like he was the kind of guy who had the right to make you confess. You aren't an aura American, the guy grated out. But it was just a job. They provided the materials, I made the potions and delivered them. Easy. And when they're used, Michael chided the man. On muggles, the guy shrugged, or at least as much as he could thoroughly trust up. Why does an elf want to use explosions on muggles? Something about drawing attention. I don't know. They pay me to brew, not to care about politics. He looked around what he could see of the room. It's gone anyway, I'm not sure where. I already put it on the train. I should have ridden with it, I guess. How much did you make? About 400 liters. It took quite some time. The guy seemed pleased with himself. Michael signaled, and I stunned the guy again. This is bad, he asked. I nodded. Based on how big those crates probably were, and if I'm visualizing soda bottles right. Could be, what, a dozen heavy crates. I've never made more than a pint of the stuff, but an ounce is enough to blow a big guy off his feet. Each crate is probably like a big pack of dynamite. I don't know enough about demolitions to judge what you could do with that much, Michael thought out loud. I shrugged because I didn't either. But it sounds really bad. Can we just turn him over to the auras? Percy asked. At the very least, he was muggle baiting. That much of the potion is probably illegal too. If you don't think they're corrupt here, okay, Michael nodded. I think I can talk to Knack about getting him picked up with no questions asked. But I've never known the wizarding police to really care about what happens to ordinary people. I had a hard time disagreeing with him. It wasn't easy to go back to vacation after that. We traded contact information with Michael in case any of us learned something. And we had to fess up to the chaperones more or less what we'd been up to. We didn't dwell on the particulars busting up Necropolis, so much as just seeing Michael and helping him track an illegal potions lab. We always had a real grown-up with us from then on. Marley Weasley, in particular, had a very scathing tirade about Percy putting his life in danger instead of just calling the auras. She wanted to know why we even bothered going on vacation instead of walking deep into Nocturne Alley at home and picking a fight. The second week of August, the Grangers joined up, flying in from France. With them in tow, it was a lot easier to see the Muggle side of the city, which the adults felt like might be safer in case more Death Eater bounty hunters were in the area. Word had gotten to the Longbottoms that the Egyptian auras had tracked down several crates of the illegal irrumpent potion through various detection spells and removed it to safety. So maybe everything was completely fine. We'd done a good thing, and leaving it up to the proper authorities had paid off. Of course, my life is rarely that easy. Michael got word to us that he was worried that he needed to be in downtown Cairo, so we should definitely stay away and let him handle it. Naturally, Mathilda insisted that meant we needed to be there. And that's how the original crew of the 6 of us wound up deciding that we wanted to learn about the Egyptian Parliament and check out the other government buildings downtown on the last Thursday of our trip, August 19th. Naturally, Arthur Weasley was happy to chaperone on a trip to learn about the Muggle equivalent of the Ministry, and Alice Longbottom tagged along just in case the girls wanted to break off from the guys to do something. Fortunately, it seemed super boring to all the younger kids who insisted on going to see the pyramids, safely far away. Bill was apparently pyramid-sitting for one of his fellow curse breakers that week, so could get the kids in to see some of the hidden chambers that weren't on the Muggle tour. It took most of the day to finally spot Michael. He was easy to notice because he was running. He looked frantic, chasing after a motorcade of black cars leaving Tarius Square and turning east past us where we were looking around the campus of the American University. It was nice to talk to more people who wanted to speak English for a bit. Even in traffic, cars are faster than a running middle-aged man. We were closer, but it took a few vital seconds for me to realize what was going on. By the time I realized he was trying to stop the cars, it didn't matter. They were still a couple hundred yards from us, but in the midst of possibly hundreds of other tourists between the university and a Muggle government building. I saw what Michael had seen from his better vantage point. Suspicious construction in the street at a corner that could intercept traffic to the Ministry of the Interior from multiple directions. We were too late. Boom.